So yeah, lately I've been playing this game called Coral Island, and it's been fun, but it's such a painful ripoff of Stardew Valley. Like the farm is situated in the same place in town, like as Stardew Valley, and like so many of the mechanics are the same. And I've been reading people defending it, being like, no, this is just showing you that this type of game is like a genre now. But I'm like, this I can see where you're coming from, but like this is straight up feels like just a clone.
Well, here's a wild thing. Here's a wild thing that you might not know, sweet Kira. Um, Stardew Valley is itself a rip-off of Harvest Moon. Like quite blatantly so, because it was out on the Switch Virtual Console thing a few months ago. I think it was like in September or something last year, and I played it because I hadn't played it for the first time. I thought, oh, I really liked Stardew Valley. I should try out Harvest Moon because that inspired it, and it is painfully the same. So there you go, rip-offs.
It's like a combination of all of the good stuff about the entire Harvest Moon and Rune Factory series put together, which is like, like that's ideal really. But yeah, I used to play Harvest Moon on like Super Nintendo back in the day. It's like
That's the one I was playing.
yeah, it's so good. But yeah, Stardew Valley is definitely the apex of that formula.
So there you go.
Still painfully a clone. But now I need to check out Harvest Moon for sure.
I honestly, I would say that Stardew, like if you've played the shit out of Stardew Valley, you probably don't need to play Harvest Moon because it is like Mule said, painfully similar to the point where you'll probably just feel like you're playing the same game again, but like the worse version, I would say.
It is a worse version. I was going to
Yeah.
say it's not. There's
It
a
is.
lot of like quality of life stuff that's just like.
I will say though, Coral Island does have unique elements. Like there is a lot of unique gameplay in it. But like I'm even noticing like a lot of the songs sound like ripoffs of songs I know, like from The
Yeah.
Little Mermaid, but they'll change like two notes. And I'm like, this game is just creeping me out. Like I'm trying to play it just so I can scratch that itch because like once you start, you kind of have to finish it. But like I kind of want out.
I have a friend playing it that said it was she said it was just like Stardew Valley except the people are hotter and
The people are so hot. The people are it's a town of like really hot people on an island and they're all single. I don't understand this.
what's going on there? I was actually talking to a friend of mine about how our ideal like little kind of I guess like retro RPG vibe would be somewhere between Stardew Valley and Fear and Hunger. So I don't know if that means anything to a lot of people watching, but yeah, like if you want to make a game that I personally will enjoy and you want to spend a lot of time and resources doing this just for me, then that's what you can do. All right, how are we
Well,
doing, everyone?
welcome to Red Planet, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry that we haven't had a show recently. Things have been a little bit hectic, but we are back with a show.
Yeah, and this week we're planning on talking about electoralism. We got iDanSimpson joining us a little bit later on, but yeah, before then we got a couple things to talk about. Before our news, it's been so normally we start with what's the most base thing you've done this week, but it's been a couple of weeks, so hopefully that means we've got more things to pick from. What about Mule? Mule always has like the best base stuff. Like, what have you been up to, Mule?
You want me to start? Okay, all right. Well, Kira's always mad at me doing lots of stuff, so I'm just gonna say a few things. So basically, it's all tenants union stuff. Essentially, there's nothing really more that I've been doing. I guess like I will use this opportunity to say that, I think that things are pretty depressing for everyone right now. They certainly have been for me, and I think that's something that is being echoed on social media and in a lot of organizing spaces as well. But having like a solid sort of organization that I am organizing with, that I have regular meetings with, that I meet people with, that I am doing activism with and getting like a bunch of different results from, has been a real grounding force. And it's something that I've never really experienced before. I've only really experienced like little bits and pieces of it because I used to knock around with, I was actually talking about one of the staff members from our org, Isaac, who brought a book out this week, which you should check out, called The Rentier City. It's absolutely amazing, and I would highly recommend it if you want to have a little look at how Manchester is sort of being used as the blueprint for neoliberal architecture, in sort of like making like the late stage capitalist city, essentially. But I was talking with him about it, and like a lot of my friends that I knocked around with for years, they were all the sons, daughters, children of activists from back in the day, like really organized trade unionists, squatters, new age travelers, all this kind of thing. And sort of like the only thing that was different with their kids scene is that like they're just not very organized. They're very mobilized. They could be super fucking mobilized and turn up to like a protest at the drop of a hat, but when it comes to organized, they're just not that organized. And I was kind of part of that gang, and now having that organization is like, oh, this is the thing that I was missing back in the day. Like it's actually true, real solidarity, because you can have your friends, but sometimes it's never like, oh, well, actually, like, you're a renter and I'm a renter and we have solidarity in that. It was more like, well, you've got your problems, I've got mine. And that's obviously a very neoliberal individualist way to talk about things. But having that now, that like understanding of solidarity and other stuff is really, really grounding. So please, everybody, if you're struggling with that upset, depression, feeling of hopelessness, I cannot recommend organizing enough. But what are some things that I've actually been doing over the past few weeks? Well, got a couple of members who have been struggling with eviction stuff. It's just all the same, like, awful landlords putting the rent up, not doing it properly, and then the person thinking they have to pay the rent. So unfortunately, that means that it is legal. It's like they've done it illegally. They have to give you notice and they have to give you like a proper form from the government website, but they've fucked that up. But if you agree to the rent rise and you start paying it, that basically means legally you're a bit fucked, and you can't really say, oh, well, they did that wrong. Oh, it doesn't matter because you're paying the rent. So there's been a couple of situations like that, and I have had some like nice mini wins. For example, got a couple of people who live literally down the road from me who've been struggling with mold, damp, to the point where one of the tenants has got like a fungal infection on her arm. It's not like super nasty. It's not like looks gross, but you know what I mean? It is like horrible thing to have to deal with because of the disrepair in the flat. And all we had to do was empower them to write a letter knowing their rights and saying, look, you missold us this flat. We're invoking our 90-day right to unwind. That's our right as consumers in this country. And they sent a copy to the letting agent and the landlord. And there's a reason that we do that. And I'll tell you why. Because when they sent it to the letting agent were like, no, you can't do that. Nonsense, just stupid, ridiculous nonsense in reception of that. But the landlord, who doesn't want to hear from her tenants ever, that's why she's got the letting agent, went absolutely sicko mode at the letting agent, because like she got this letter and was like, I don't want to be receiving things like this. You should be doing your job properly. Get in there and sort that out now. And it was like within a week they turned up and they were like, oh my God, we're gonna fix this. Don't worry about it. We'll get some builders in next week.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and you can even you can take that, like there's that way of looking at it, or it's like that could also be effective in a situation where there is a landlord that is just like wanting to maintain their investment, so I think that's like a really good thing to do in all kinds of situations. That could be a really helpful thing to just
you got to have that it's, what do they call it, diversity of tactics, right? It's like, the more stuff that you throw at the wall, the more it's going to stick. So that was a really good win. We didn't even have to send a letter, like that wasn't even tenants union letter-headed documentation that we got them to send that on. That was just a letter that they sent themselves. So that was really empowering for them, and that felt really good that we were able to like get them to feel empowered to stick up for themselves like that. On top of that, we also had so there's this one member who has an awful landlord influencer as their landlord.
Oh no.
Yeah, and I've seen him. I'm not going to mention his name because just in the very, very slim chance that he ever sees this and he gets wind that we're planning on doing, you know, some applying some pressure to him kind of thing. But it's just a nightmare. It's one of these nightmare situations where this woman is you know, really suffering. Like, I'm not going to go into the specifics, but she's had some really like life-threatening medical stuff happen as a result of living in this property due to the stress and due to the disrepair and all that kind of stuff. So all we did was send a letter in writing, an email with the tenants union documentation on this time to this letting agent and to the landlord. And I sent it on like a Tuesday night a couple of weeks ago. And on Wednesday morning, the first thing that I saw in the inbox for the union was like this massive screed from this letting agent just saying things like, this tenant is lying to you. They're lying. None of it's true. Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, fucking brilliant. They're rattled. They're fucking rattled. Like, they saw this. They probably, what happens is they see the Great Manchester Tenants Union thing. They go, what's that? And they Google it, and it comes up with all these like wins that we've had. So that's the importance of the propaganda. That's the importance of comms and social media and all that stuff. And they've gone, oh fuck, we need to address this because otherwise they're gonna do something. Anyway, sorry Tim, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was going to say, it reminds me of a quote. I just brought it up by my boy Ernesto Che Guevara. War is always a struggle in which each contender tries to annihilate the other. Besides using force, they will have recourse to all possible tricks and stratagems in order to achieve the goal. And I feel like that's the thing, right? It's like you have to really embrace unconventional tactics when you know, like, and I mean, it's like, it does sound cheesy to say like, oh, this is a war, but I mean, it's class war, right? You know,
That's exactly it.
with these influencer landlords. I think it is kind of funny because it can also work against them that they are, you know, these influencer types, because, you know, like, I've seen people that are like, you know, there's like the bailiff influencer, kind of like eviction people and stuff, and a lot of the time they've had their own content used against them in court, or even just the fact that people love to take down an influencer. So you know,
They do be loving that. That's true.
yeah. You know, so if it's like working class people, you know, like, that have been, you know, like the victim of these kind of influencer landlords or bailiffs or whatever like that, I think you can use their position as an influencer against them, even if it's just a threat to their reputation, you know.
Oh, absolutely. Like, if some of the stuff that came up, I mean, we found some information out thanks to, you know, our collective knowledge about the property that she lives in. That's very funny. And again, I don't want to say too much just in case this, you know, if there's the slim chance that he's watching, but he has done something incredibly stupid, like the most, like, it's very illegal what he's done. And it's like, okay, and this is like something that is just going to be so easy to turn around and say, you've done this, right? At the end of the day, there is every right for us to you know, advise our member to take you to court. You're going to have to spend thousands of pounds to go to court, and you're not going to win. That's just the end of it. You're just not going to win, dude. So pay up, basically. And that's that's sort of going to be our leverage. So it's very exciting. Lots of exciting stuff going on with the tenants union. Can't mention all of it, obviously, in all of this. And that's just a little bit of what I've done. But go ahead, Kira. Go ahead. Tell us what the most base thing you've done over the last couple of weeks is.
Honestly, it's been a rough few weeks for me. I think probably the most base thing I've done is kind of taking a step back from the internet, and I'm trying to take care of myself, focusing on nutrition. And I think soon I'll be focusing on like fitness, but also, I don't know, just thinking about what I'm going to do with everything. It's kind of been on my mind a lot. And obviously I have to take action in some direction of like how I'm going to proceed. If anyone's just tuning in, don't know anything about me, Twitch banned me permanently a few months ago, and for claiming that I was promoting terrorism on my channel because I was advocating for Palestinian rights. And it's been really rough because my entire career is on Twitch. I've been streaming on Twitch full time for like 5 years now, like overall like 7 years. So it's been pretty traumatic, and we've been working with a lawyer to figure out how we can proceed on that end. But apart from that, I'm trying to figure out what to do. So yeah, I guess the the most base thing for me is just I don't really know, just trying to take care of myself amidst all this. It's not been easy for me. But I'm hoping that today's show will be a little bit of a, a little therapeutic, because the last time I tried to stream on YouTube, I had a bit of a panic attack, which I've gone to the doctor and talked to the doctor about. And so I'm trying to take steps forward instead of just internalizing everything. So that's kind of what I've been up to. um, what about you, Tim?
Yeah, I've been kind of all over the place for the last couple of weeks. I've been in the process of the tattoo studio that I work in has been like closing down because we're wrapping things up at the end of the lease, and so shifting over to a new place that I start very soon. But we had to like revert the entire place to its kind of pre-lease condition. So I've been super busy with that, like doing everything, like painting walls, knocking things down, all that kind of stuff. But aside from that, there's been quite a few Palestine solidarity rallies and stuff, all over the country. But yeah, I've been attending those in Auckland when I can. There was obviously we had Waitangi Day here recently. I think I had to skip a stream because of because the event surrounding that, which is like it's going off at the moment. It's pretty big because we have a new coalition government that perhaps we will talk a little bit about later on, because we talked about electoralism today, that is making fast moves, like under urgency, repealing a lot of progressive policy, a lot of like pro-Maori kind of stuff. And so it's been interesting because it's probably the biggest kind of I would say it's the most actively anti-Maori government that we've had in a long time. They're pushing through stuff like, yeah, under urgency. It's very like undemocratic for whatever that means. But it also has had, I would say, quite a unifying effect on a lot of people, where some of especially with like there's like a huge thing now where there's like a lot of solidarity between, because there's always been a lot of solidarity for Palestine from Maori activists, but recently I feel like a lot more kind of like liberal types and stuff have kind of become more radicalized in favor of Palestine, and it's picking up the momentum that is building there is also building with a lot of the kind of Maori, like I would say, like probably refer to people as like pro-treaty activists or protesters is probably the easiest way to describe it to a foreign audience. But and so it's kind of like everything is unifying together, and it's like a very kind of yeah, it's a very big thing to see, like thousands of people every weekend turning out for these things. And outside of kind of the activist and protest and rally spaces, there have been like, on like the Maori side of things, there's been a huge kind of unification of like, there's like even tribes that have had like, like these beefs going back like over 100 years that are, like joining together and making statements to say like, like our like historic kind of like squabbles over land, like who owns this particular piece of land or whatever is, like we're putting that aside and we're unifying together to, I guess, like jointly stand against the coalition government and redirect resources towards there, which is like huge, but yeah, and there's been a lot of that kind of stuff, and it's as shitty as it is to see a lot of these things happening in government, where it's like things that I thought that our country was past, like that we had kind of like through years and years of activism and all this kind of stuff, we had won certain battles, and now it's kind of like it's all just, it's all back on the table. So despite how shitty that feels to see, it is also really kind of like I feel hopeful about it, considering like I don't think that when this is over, when this coalition government gets kicked out, replaced, or whatever like that, I don't think people become unradicalized, right? Like not in that way. Like I think it just, like I think they're inadvertently pushing people to become more politically engaged with a lot more radical kind of politics, which yeah, I think is something that a lot of groups are taking advantage of, like in the good way, like a lot of progressive Maori groups are really kind of trying to channel that energy to be like, hey, you're mad about this, don't just kind of like, like don't complain about the government and just, wait until the next election or whatever like that. Like we need to like kind of stand together and figure out these things and, like plan for, I guess, like the bigger picture, like the long goal, instead of just being like, get Labor back in and then just let them fuck around for a couple of years or whatever. So yeah, there's a bigger picture that I think a lot of groups have been pretty successful in relating to the public, which is good. So yeah, so that's kind of where I've been at. We want to know what base things you've been doing. You can message us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, or send an email to based@redplanetshow.com. Include your name and pronouns if you're cool with that, and we may shout it out in a later episode. So we don't have anyone for this week, but yeah, if you got something, send it through, and we'll shout you out in a future one. So, news. Did you want to kick us off, Mule?
Yes, we're going to be starting today's news segment talking about Aaron Bushnell. Most people know about this, but I think it's just really important to reinforce what happened. And so Aaron Bushnell, 25, self-immolated in front of the Israel embassy in DC on the 25th of February, 2024. As he approached the embassy with a canteen of gasoline, he said, I'm an active duty member of the United States Air Force. I will no longer be complicit to genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest. But compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal. He said this when he was live on Twitch channel Liliana Kitty and proceeded to douse himself in the gasoline and light himself on fire. Bushnell said on the morning of his death on Facebook, many of us like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I was alive during slavery or the Jim Crow South or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is, you're doing it right now, which confirms how deeply he felt about the genocide happening to Palestinians. This was an extreme act of protest following the likes of Thinh Quang Duc, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk who self-immolated to protest the colonization of Vietnam in 1963. It is widely believed to be the most painful way to die, and it rightfully sent shockwaves around the world, much in the same way that we are seeing with Aaron's self-immolation. His portrait was raised in Yemen earlier this week, the first American to receive such an honor. And according to Twitter user Aldanaki, a banner stating the words, "I refuse to be complicit in genocide, free Palestine" in Arabic, with Bushnell's face on it, will be hung in the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank have held up their phones and taken pictures of the words on them reading RIP, Aaron Bushnell, and various other sentiments of love and solidarity on them. Anti-imperialist leaders all over the world, including Evo Morales, and the other person is escaping me who did it, but there's been a few of them, have also voiced their mourning and their love and solidarity for Aaron Bushnell and those he leaves behind. Bushnell's friends have all commented on how sweet and kind and caring he was and how dedicated he was to the cause of liberation and anti-colonialism worldwide. We join the world in mourning Bushnell, an obviously passionate comrade with love, liberation, and solidarity at the core of his being, and want to use this opportunity to encourage people to organize collectively and continue to build the world that he would have wanted in his memory and honor, mourn the dead, and fight for the living. And with that said, Kira, do you want to update us on Cop City?
Sure. Georgia is cracking down on Cop City activists as Atlanta City Council tries to silence them. So state and local officials in Georgia continue to push forward on efforts to build the police training facility we all know as Cop City, using every lever of power to crush resistance from protesters and activists. On February 5th, the Atlanta City Council held a vote changing the rules on referendum petitions to require signature matching. These rule changes seek to invalidate as many of the 116,000 signatures demanding a referendum on the project as possible. According to analysis from some media organizations, as many as half of these signatures could be rejected under the new requirements. Just another example of how bureaucracy can be used by fascism to perpetuate fascism. In response, protesters took over the council chambers to once more demand that the city put the proposed project up for public vote. While the city council has been working to stop the public from being heard, the Attorney General's office has been attempting to expand their powers to imprison activists. Not satisfied with abusing RICO laws, typically used in organized crime cases, to claim that protesters are a criminal conspiracy, they have successfully convinced a judge to allow into evidence a cell phone carried by defendant Ayla King, which prosecution characterized as a, quote, burner phone. Despite the fact that the phone contained no data and prosecutors provided no evidence that the phone was used to commit a crime, the judge accepted that merely having a basic cell phone was incriminating. In the early morning on February 10th, police and federal agencies performed raids on 3 houses targeting suspected activists. One victim of the raids stated that she had been pulled from her home and handcuffed while half naked and placed into a squad car, where she remained exposed despite asking to put on clothes as officers came into and out of the car, one even taking photographs while insisting, quote, "It's only of your face." Neither she nor the other 2 residents of the home were arrested for any crime. Only one arrest resulted from the raids, an activist who has been charged with arson related to the burning of 8 police motorcycles in July. They joined 61 people who have been indicted based on their opposition to the project, with Atlanta's police chief, Darren Shirebaum, stating more arrests will come soon. So, pretty important. Tim, do you want to tell me what's going on with Alexei Navalny?
So, I was just saying before stream that I actually had a little bit of a fire exchange at a barbecue last night about just this very fella. So Alexei Navalny, very, very prominent opposition figure in Russia. So like a very vocal critic of Putin. Was recently declared deceased with sudden death syndrome. So Navalny has been the target of numerous assassination attempts over the years, and yeah, sounds like one stuck. But he'd been imprisoned in Russia for a couple years now, the last 2 years, because he returned to Russia after surviving an attempted assassination the year before, and yeah, during this time he disappeared in the prison system. Um, he was moved to a pretty distant penal colony, and yeah, they're saying that he collapsed and fell unconscious and died after a walk. So we're seeing a lot of Western nations do these big dramatic kind of, like dedications and shout outs and calling, like making out like he is a kind of was like some liberal figurehead in Russia. So yeah, which is extremely untrue. There was a movie that they made about him like 2 years or so ago that kind of, I think they were trying to make out like he's some kind of like Russian Gandhi character or something like that. No, he's an ultra far right nationalist. He was a member of Yabloko, the Russian Liberal Party, which is like, it's like one of the oldest mainstream political parties in Russia. He got kicked out of there for being a nationalist. He was, like going to far right events, like the Russian March, which is all about Russia for ethnic Russians. Um, Referred to himself as a far right nationalist, a certified nationalist. There's a famous video of him that looks like a propaganda video out of Starship Troopers, where he is talking about exterminating flies and cockroaches, and then takes out a gun and shoots a man wearing a keffiyeh. And yeah, just like, all this kind of stuff. He's he was a terrible piece of shit. Obviously, Putin is too, and that he shouldn't have the right to, like he shouldn't be able to assassinate his political enemies or anything like that. But you do have to be extremely skeptical of the way that the West is framing his death, especially, especially in ways that, like sometimes these political assassinations are utilized to bring democracy, to kind of further U.S. hegemony. So yeah, there was a funeral for Navalny a couple days ago. I think, yeah, his mum was trying to get his body back from authorities for a couple weeks. Um, the authorities were trying to do like a secret burial sort of thing, which is interesting, especially when someone dies from mysterious circumstances. Um, and yeah, there was a bunch of people were arrested for these kind of public gatherings, outpourings of grief or support or whatever like that, all over Russia. And yeah, I think they say there was over 400 people arrested in the days following the announcement of his death. Um, yeah, he initially kind of blew up outside of Russia because he was posting a lot of YouTube videos online, talking about, the kind of the Russian oligarchs and their fortunes and where all that kind of stuff comes from, which was attention that Putin didn't really like. Before that, I think he wasn't really considered much of a player or anything like that, but because of the attention to outside of Russia and even inside Russia, like yeah, he's survived by his wife Yulia, who has vowed to continue his work, for better or worse, right? So I think yeah, that's going to be interesting to see develop. I think last I heard as well, that Putin had kind of set his sights on Navalny's brother as well. But yeah, I think it's it is good to keep an eye on these things, and we have to be critical of, like obviously Putin and all this kind of stuff like that. But just yeah, don't believe everything you hear or see about Navalny. And I think over the next few years, he is probably going to be invoked over and over again as a kind of martyr. So yeah, I don't know, like yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially I think there is a lot of like, because we know obviously like Russia, Russia and Putin doing bad things, this shit, whatever. But we have to be extremely critical of the way that the West will, um like it's we were talking about this a little bit earlier, as a bulwark against US hegemony, Russia are one of the biggest things stopping, like America from just taking over the entire region just completely, and everyone living in democracy, freedom land, or whatever like that. So even though Russia are shit, we have to be really careful when America starts coming for them and when they start kind of beating the Cold War drums and stuff, because that's sounds like, I mean, it basically has been happening for a while, and there's reasons why that ties into like Ukraine and all this kind of stuff like that. So we have to be really skeptical of any kind of propaganda that we see coming from America that justifies, any kind of like invasion or anything like that, which is obviously just going to end up in more working class people being sent to their dooms from both sides. So yeah, keep that in mind. We'll see how that develops. But Kira, why don't you give us a little bit of an update? It's been a few weeks now, so a lot has happened in Palestine. So yeah, there's a little bit here. So you want to give us a little run through of what's up?
Sure. And just like every week when I talk about Palestine, this is not going to be even remotely comprehensive. I kind of focus this week on less immediately timely. Well, some of it is timely, but I also wanted to focus on some bigger issues. So I'm going to start off with one of those. The first one I want to discuss is how Israel is stepping up its arrest campaign, something that people tend to not really talk about as much. They'll talk more about the genocidal atrocities, but they won't really talk too much about the arrest campaign. So for this segment, I'll be using prisoner and hostage interchangeably with regards to Palestinians. And I personally don't like using the word prisoner as much because of how like unjustified the occupation is and the nature of how Palestinians are detained. I see them as political like hostages. And I think there's a pretty strong argument for that. Yeah. But so just FYI, I'll use prisoner and hostage interchangeably here. So Israel continues to ramp up its mass abduction campaign in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Remember, this isn't Gaza. So we're talking about the other Palestinian territories. Many people, including me, suspect this massive ramp up in state-sanctioned abductions is in retaliation for the October 7th attacks and to compensate for the quote-unquote losses Israel experienced when they were forced to release Palestinian prisoners during hostage negotiations with Hamas. And also recall that October 7th, one of the main reasons the October 7th attacks occurred was to release Palestinian hostages. That was like as soon as the attacks occurred, Hamas said, we took your people and we will give them back for our people. And so this has been on the docket since day one. Most Palestinians abducted by the Zionist entity are held under the premise of, quote unquote, administrative detention, which is a bogus category Israel routinely uses to justify holding Palestinians without charge and without due process. In other words, they're kidnapped. Children are also not spared from this treatment. Israeli authorities have also started making Palestinians strip for transport and assign them numbers instead of names in an attempt to humiliate them. Israeli soldiers even circulate videos of themselves assaulting prisoners. As we're all familiar, Israel has launched a relentless assault on the Gaza Strip since October 7th, killing more than 30,000 people, half of them children. In the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, Israel has arrested around 7,000 people, often without charges, making the total number of Palestinian prisoners nearly 10,000, adding serious overcrowding to the challenges they face. And what are the other challenges Palestinian hostages are facing? Well, in short, torture. They are emotionally tormented, beaten with iron rods, starved, stripped of their clothing, blankets, and other necessities for warmth, denied medical treatment, are sexually assaulted, and sometimes murdered. And once again, children are subjected to this treatment. And once again, Palestinians are routinely held without charge or due process. In Negev prison, prisoner Thayer Abu Asab asked a guard if there was a ceasefire. This is just an example of the treatment that they received. The Israeli guard responded, "I'll show you." Then the guard called a whole unit into Abu Asab's cell, and they beat him with iron rods all over, including his face, left him lying there. The prisoners were too afraid to ask for medical attention, but eventually unable to watch him suffer, they shouted until a nurse came to examine him. 2 days later, they were told he had died. After this, everyone in Abu Asab's cell was beaten near daily with iron rods. The Palestinian Prisoner Society, PPS, has recorded thousands of injuries, fractures, bruises, and worse among imprisoned Palestinians who get no treatment. 8 prisoners have died in the last 4 months after being beaten and not treated, like, for example, Mohammed al-Sabar, who died in Oxford prison about 17 days ago. The torture in prison begins immediately upon detention. Hanin al-Masaid from Bethlehem's Ida refugee camp was arrested in October 2023 and released as part of the Hamas-initiated hostage exchange deals in November. On October 11th, Israeli occupied forces raided her home and gathered her family in one room, which wasn't surprising for her. After all, unjustified invasive raids by the Zionist entity are an everyday occurrence in Ida. However, they confiscated her phone, told her there was a warrant for her, then her hands were tightly bound and she was blindfolded. A female soldier put her in an Israeli police car and played Hebrew songs loudly, placing the speaker right up next to Hanin's ear to insult her and provoke her. Her hands remained tightly bound for hours. She was taken to Sharon prison, where female guards beat the prisoners, insulted them, and took away their blankets and mattresses, and gave them 1 meal a day. And I shall also note that these blankets and mattresses were long fought for by Palestinians to receive even just the basic of treatments, and these things are being stripped from them now. Like all Israeli brutality, the violence isn't always immediate. Much of it comes in the form of disease and neglect. Prisons are massively overcrowded with the occupation's fervor for abducting innocent Palestinians, which is leading to a spread of disease. Prisoners with chronic diseases were already neglected before the war, but since October 7th, prison authorities then stopped even scant medications and treatment. Mobility aids and other medical devices were also taken away. Food is withheld or improperly prepared. For instance, many Palestinians reporting being served uncooked rice. Prisoners are not allowed to shower and often have to wash their clothes and put them on wet because their other clothes have been confiscated, which further spreads disease. Their cells are overcrowded. Prisoners sleep on the floor without blankets. These are all intentional decisions the Zionist entity is making to torture Palestinians. PPS also documented attacks in which special units enter prisoner cells to assault prisoners and trample on their heads. In one instance, prisoners were forced to the ground and female recruits were told to step on their heads. Former prisoner Kamal Abu Arab said, "The occupation does not respect our humanity, and the prisoners feel forgotten. No one mentions them. No visits from lawyers. No visits from the Red Cross. News is prohibited. Prayers and the call to prayer are prohibited. Medical treatments are prohibited, and requests are prohibited. According to the administration of the prison service, we have no rights as humans. Does anyone remember us in the world?" And speaking of the Red Cross's absence has contributed to these rampant abuses. Pathetic in its influence before, at least its once-a-month visits to each Israeli prison would force Israel to divulge which Palestinians were abducted, so the Red Cross could notify their families. But since October 7th, the Red Cross has stopped these visits entirely. The Red Cross, along with the rest of the international community, has not exerted nearly enough pressure on Israel to comply with international standards. One wonders when Israel will ever be held accountable for their blatant, enthusiastic evil, their gross violations of human rights, of children's rights. But unfortunately, today isn't that day. And it pains me to tell you that apart from this, Israel has now murdered over 30,400 Palestinians. The majority of women and children, and almost all of them are non-combatants. Al-Rashid Street Massacre is something that I want to talk about briefly. This happened a few days ago. On Thursday morning, Israel murdered at least 112 Palestinian civilians and injured at least 760 as Palestinians were queued up for aid on Al-Rashid Street near Gaza City. Thousands of Palestinians were desperately waiting for food and other aid around 4:30 a.m. when Israeli forces opened fire into the crowd, which is another level of atrocity that I continue to be shocked, not surprised, but somehow shocked. After initially denying the knowledge of the incident, the Israeli military later said that it had started firing on a group of civilians waiting for aid who, quote, dangerously approached them. And this is according to an Israeli military official quoted by the Times of Israel, a piece of shit Zionist publication. Israeli tanks advanced and ran over many of the dead and injured bodies in the southwestern parts of Gaza City, says Al Jazeera Network's reporter in Gaza. I repeat, according to this network, Al Jazeera Network's reporter in Gaza, the Israeli tanks ran over those that were wounded by this open fire. The rest of the wounded and dying, most of them can't be helped, but many of them were rushed to the barely functioning Al-Shifa and Kamal Adwan hospitals, which are immensely overcrowded already and lacking supplies. There was a few ambulances that with remaining fuel that could be used. And some of the aid trucks were even just turned around and driven to the hospitals because there is no way to transport these people. I've even heard reports of donkeys having to putting people in the carriages and having donkeys take them to hospitals, or people just using their hands to try to carry people to these hospitals. And these hospitals are barely functioning. So on top of all this, Netanyahu is now vowing to invade Rafah despite the massive global outcry to the contrary. So Israel has set a deadline for the beginning of Ramadan for an invasion of Rafah if the remaining hostages are not free by the beginning of the holiday, which starts on the 10th of April. If you're not familiar, Rafah is the southernmost city in Gaza, and it's beyond capacity with more than half of Gaza's 2.3 million population there. Normally, extremely dense already at 300,000 people, today Rafah holds more than 1.5 million people. Most of the inhabitants are Palestinians who are seeking refuge there, as Israel insisted for months now that Rafah would be safe from their genocidal bombardment. Now, Rafah effectively serves as a concentrated holding cell for Palestinians, completely vulnerable to attack by the Zionist entity and completely weakened and dying by a spreading famine, which has recently claimed the life of 16 children. They're also weakened by dehydration, by disease. Netanyahu said, whoever tells us not to operate in Rafah is telling us to lose the war, insisting that a ground operation in Gaza's Rafah will go ahead despite warnings from countries including Australia, Canada, and New Zealand that such a move would have a devastating impact on the forcibly displaced Palestinians sheltering there. In Rafah, food and other essential supplies are scarce amid severe Israeli restrictions on the transport of food, fuel, water, and humanitarian aid into Gaza. Egypt is also not allowing Palestinians across Rafah unless they can provide steep fees. And even then, passage is not guaranteed. I should reiterate that the blockade, the siege on Gaza, has been upheld in part by Israel and in part by Egypt. What are Palestinians to do? Where can they go? The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Palestine has slammed the planned Israeli ground offensive on the city. Quote, Rafah stands as the last line of Palestinian existence in Gaza amidst the relentless anguish faced by the people trapped therein. And that's said by Francesca Albanese. Israel has banned Francesca, banned her entry into their occupied territories for her truthful statement that, quote, the victims of the October 7th massacre were not murdered because of their Jewishness, but in response to Israeli oppression. Israel claimed this statement was anti-Semitic. In the meantime, yesterday, people in hundreds of cities across the globe protested in the streets ahead of Israel's planned attack on Rafah. described as a global day of action by organizers. The demonstrations, called Hands Off Rafah, were organized by a coalition of hundreds of rights groups from a diversity of backgrounds. And I'm hearing there's a lot of first-time protesters coming out too, which is very hard. It's very, amidst all of this horror, it's good to see that people are waking up and taking action finally. And that's pretty much my entire report on Palestine. Remember, this is not even remotely comprehensive to all the atrocities, but I hope that gives you a feel for what's going on.
Yeah, so much to go through. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. And there, I could talk for hours, but yeah. But we would like to remind everyone that Red Planet is made possible by the direct support of our viewers. So if you would like to continue seeing this show and hearing these very morbid reports on Palestine every week, make sure to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/red_planet and become a member. Do any of y'all have any comments on the Palestine segment? I forgot to ask.
I mean, it's difficult, right? Because how much more do we need to say? Not only have we covered exactly what's going on in Palestine, but we covered Bushnell's self-immolation. This is the lengths of which people are pushed to try and draw attention to it at the moment. And I think that, personally, what I've noticed is, because you'll see a lot of people, and this is just being online, but I've seen a lot of this kind of similar stuff in real life too, where there are people who've, like you say, never been on a protest like this before, and they're like, talking about this, that, and the other. And then I'm there, and I'm used to hanging out with commies, fucking anarchists, all kinds of radical anti-imperialist people. And I'm just going, yeah, imperialism go burr. And they're like, what? And, you explain it to them, and then they're kind of like, oh, right. And then, you do a bit more sort of talking, and you realize, oh, yeah, these people are just like liberals. They've come out because they know that this is a bad thing, but they're coming out and they're getting more and more educated about it. And they're realizing week after week, oh, actually, nothing is changing despite the protests, but we're still doing it, and that's radicalizing them further. And I've talked about this before, but it is good. It is a good thing that people are feeling radicalized about it. Again, it's not nearly enough, but it is still far more than I ever thought would happen when the invasion of Gaza inevitably happened.
I will say that the protests, the BLM protests that I was a part of, and the creation of the Chaz in Seattle and all that, very much radicalized me, because that was the first time I ever consistently protested for something. I'd done protests before. I did a protest for animal rights, like back in the day before I knew anything about politics. But I still felt very strongly about what I felt, so I came out. But for the BLM protests, I really thought that continually protesting would certainly do something. And then you saw that the biggest mass, or at least maybe not now, maybe with Palestine, this has changed, but previous to Palestine, previous to October 7th, excuse me, the BLM protests were the biggest mass protests in the world, like across the globe, people getting out there and protesting for Black Lives Mattering and to protest against police brutality. And we saw what? Increased funding to the police, more police militarization. We do not see any sort of appreciable gains for Black people, at least the Black people that I've asked this question to. They're like, no, I think actually things have gotten a lot worse. So I think I personally was radicalized by the lack of progress that was made despite the mass mobilization of people in the streets. And if I can't imagine I have such a freak brain that that would only happen to my brain. I would imagine that if people are coming out and hitting the streets for Palestine, that many of them, maybe not all, but many of them will also be similarly radicalized.
Yeah. I think it's like there's a point, right, where you realize that you're protesting the symptoms instead of the cause, right? Like you go out to protest year after year, and you're like, man, I did the anti-war protest back then. I did it a couple years later, and all this kind of stuff. And you're like, man, but we don't have world peace yet. What's going on? So yeah, and I think that's been a thing for a lot of people. And I think that seeing what's happening in Palestine, and then I think the way that a lot of activists have successfully linked that back to, like Palestine Action in the UK with linking it back to Albert Systems, literally building bombs in their hometowns and things like that. It kind of shines a light on how, on how these things are connected. So it's been really great. But yeah, it's one of those things that it's like a terrible situation, but I think the idea as, like a communist or an anarchist is kind of to make the most of these terrible situations and, use them as radicalizing opportunities for people, which some people could say is like, like I've had liberals say that like, oh, that's really cynical. You're just trying to like, capitalize on these, terrible things. And it's like, well, the alternative is that we just don't, and then nothing changes and no one learns. And
I guess no one does anything. Just don't do anything, actually.
yeah, so it's like the terrible things are going to happen regardless. So we should be we should be doing something about it.
To be clear, I do want to say that protests are necessary. They're not inherently liberal. I do think they are liberal though when they're toothless, and that's the only prong of attack, is that you go out in the streets, you abide by the law, you ask for a permit to march, and then you go home, and then and everything's nicely and safely compartmentalized. Maybe you disrupt some traffic.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's some links for that to electoralism as well that we can perhaps get into a little bit as well.
Speaking of electoralism, we'll be talking to our guest who we'll bring on right now, iDanSimpson, today about electoralism. iDanSimpson is literally a communist. He streams regularly on Twitch, where he covers geopolitics and does readings of communist literature, which he uploads to YouTube. He's extremely based and vehemently for Palestinian rights. He's one of the only content creators that has been privately and publicly very supportive of me since Twitch indefinitely suspended me for quote unquote terrorism. He's also a gamer and enjoys the trash game Fortnite, which I've had the pleasure of joining him in. So let's all welcome my friend and comrade, iDanSimpson. Hi,
Yeah.
Dan. It's nice to see you.
It's great to see you too. Thank you, Kira. Thank you all for having me to talk about electoral politics today.
Yeah, I hear you're a big fan of voting blue.
I just can't
No
wait.
matter who.
Yeah, it's the only way I like to struggle is showing up to the polls. Obviously it's an important conversation we want to have. We're lurching towards fascism with no relief in sight. So thank you for having me today.
Yeah, no
Pleasure.
problem. Is it safe to say that if there is a ballot in front of you, you would vote right now?
God, I would. Yeah, that's the only thing I know how to do is to vote. I'm from Chicago. We like to vote early and vote often.
That's what's so frustrating about these conversations with liberals, is that like I try to cut to the chase often, and instead of just talking about what they want to talk about, just be like, can you tell me any other way that you can be politically active other than voting? And they'll try to like meander around that question. I'm like, can you just answer the question though? Because I don't think you can comprehend any other way besides maybe like a petition or something.
Yeah, there's the famous tweet of, I can't remember what the discussion was about, and someone was like, buddy, I would vote right now if I could.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of referencing with
yeah,
the ballot. Yeah.
It's so good. It's like, wow.
Liberals are not complacent. We would vote right effing now if we could or something. And they didn't even swear, which is very liberal.
Liberalism's strongest soldiers.
I think it might be good in this discussion to try and like talk a little bit about the perverse veil of what is being called democracy that hangs in front of the eyes of liberals, right?
It's like the only kind of perverse veil that I don't like.
Yeah. I'm a fan of all perverse veils, but that one. So I think like what we have to remember about like electoral politics, like as in history, is that it has been historically undemocratic, right? Absolutely undemocratic from the very sort of like beginning of votes after feudalism, especially in the UK. Talking about this from a UK perspective is like, I'm not sure how much this probably matches up with like American or Aotearoan sort of history with this kind of stuff. But, back in the day, certainly in the UK, it was only like rich people who were allowed to vote. And then it was like every man. And then it was like every man and rich women. And then it was every woman. And then, so we have this like, because there were like rights given to various different other groups, social classes, working classes, through struggle. I think that people don't see the things that are in the way, actually, the barriers to voting, that are sort of like they're not just perpetuated by, like, let's say, for example, bureaucracy. Like if you need voter ID or something, then that's a barrier. But then on top of that, also there is like political education, politicization, class consciousness. And I think if we're gonna have any kind of like criticism of it, we have to first start by letting people know that it is just, it's not democratic now, and it never has been. Like it literally never has been.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that what we have now, well, like what most Western kind of liberal democracies have now, is framed as like, like this is democracy. This is democracy that we need to bring to the imperial periphery by whatever means necessary. When it's, there's like, we have the phrase, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, right? That kind of like is a pretty good descriptor, where it's like in actual socialist states and communist states and all these places, they have or have had a much more direct form of democracy, a much more active participation in democracy. Even in, like in places like North Korea, where it's like people go like, oh, there's only one party, so you can't, like there's no democracy there. And it's kind of like, well, but so everyone can, like, you don't need more than one party if everyone can vote on all of the issues separately, things like that. Like this idea that it's like the Platonic form of democracy is, like a has like a Senate or a parliament or something like that operates with these competing teams and all these kind of things like that, where it's like, especially down here with our MMP system, so much of electoral politics is just it's kayfabe and team sports. It's like one party brings something in, and then the next people just campaign on doing the opposite to what the last guys did, and it's like we don't even end up like the working class people don't benefit from any of this.
Well, I know that Dan and I can definitely speak to this as the two Americans, by the way, which normally
the two most democratic, free people in this chat.
Normally I'm in the minority here because it's always British people and then Tim from New Zealand. And then there's me, who is just like the sole American in the room. And I have to say that I don't appreciate how often American perspectives get trounced here. And I think we should make more of an effort to platform Americans. And that's why I'm very glad that Dan is joining us today.
Yeah, that was one issue I had with the show. Not enough American voices. Our hegemony also extends into the podcast world.
I see you and I hear you, and I'm glad that we're doing right by you. But I do want to say that what Mule was saying earlier about how we've never had a democracy in America. Voting rights were originally given to white land owning men, right? That was the main criteria that you have to, and then you have your democracy, right? And today, formally, that's not the case, right? Formally, quote unquote, everyone has the right to vote, but not if you've been incriminated or for a crime, and not if you don't have access to voting. There's a lot. I remember the most I've ever paid attention to electoral politics was when Bernie. I know that Dan and I have like kind of a similar trajectory politically, so maybe you were paying a lot of attention to the Bernie Sanders election. I was paying like very granular, close attention to it, and I remember being like, "Wait a minute, people get to vote, and they have to vote today during like a certain hours, but they have to work during those same hours. How are they supposed to vote?" And like, I was just like so bewildered. It's like, how? Wait a minute, how does that even make any sense? And then there's like the different, you have the electoral college garbage and all that crap, which is like, if you vote, it doesn't really matter that much because of like how the electoral college is there to basically continue perpetuating the weighing, the heavier weight of basically land owning white males. Basically, it's meant to try to continually bias towards that direction. But yeah, like we don't have a democracy. We've never had a democracy in America, and to say that we have is just false, just strictly false. So already the idea of voting is already flawed.
Yeah, I think it is interesting when you look at, like how you're saying it, voting was initially restricted to like landowners and all that, because that's a thing that has happened all over the world, and like, you can see how it developed through like down here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We I think it was the early 1890s, we were the first country in the world, was it the first self-governing country in the world, which women had the right to vote in parliamentary elections, right? And it's like, like there was this whole thing about Kate Sheppard and the suffragettes and all this kind of stuff, but they don't actually like talk about how it was like, so it was, it was the settler government that actually denied women to vote in the first place, because previously Maori women could vote, and there was like a weird kind of gap for a little while where it was like they could still vote, but then like all like there was like if you were like a landowner or something like that and you were a Maori woman, you could still vote, but all like white women weren't allowed to vote. And then it was like just like this weird thing where it's like, a lot of the time it's tied to capital, it's tied to land, it's tied to all these kind of things like that. And it's very transparent when you actually look at it through a historical lens. It's like, this is where it is. And I think that is something that a lot of people, I think it would be interesting for a lot of people to learn that a lot of these countries weren't founded on these ideas of, like freedom and everyone, like America, New Zealand, Australia. It's not like there's this idea of like people going to the new world to start this new life and there's going to be freedom and opportunities. And it's like, well, no, it wasn't really like that, like they just ended up being like kick all the riffraff out to a new place and let them kind of establish a new class society there.
So, Dan, I've got a tweet to read you. And I want to I want to hear your reaction to this. I want to get your thoughts on this. I don't know who this person is, by the way. This person is called Bryn Tannehill. So if anyone knows who that is immediately and is laughing or whatever, then yeah, fair enough. I don't know who this person is. I'm an ignorant Brit Bonger. But Brit Tannehill says, at the result of a Fox News national poll that puts Donald Trump at 49% and Joe Biden at 47%, says, the polls keep telling the same story. We're in deep trouble. There are few undecideds out there. The results are already baked in. Campaign spending will have little effect. The US is on the verge of voting to end itself as a democracy and usher in an age of horror.
Well, how do you unwrap that onion there?
I couldn't stop myself from laughing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, are they saying that voting is the way out? I'm not quite sure. I was following that.
It's. I think the main bit here is that they're saying the US is on the verge of voting to end itself as a democracy, and it's like, it's just there's so many levels to that I think that you could try and unravel. Yeah.
It sounds like a poster that would say something along the lines of like, electing Hitler, that they think Hitler was elected. I've seen a number of liberals really believe that Hitler was elected, like people who voted for Hitler.
Well,
Have you guys noticed this? I've seen this.
Yeah, I'm looking at this person's like online footprint. It seems like they're a liberal that
What?
What?
No way! I thought
so
that they were probably really based. Oh.
Well, I mean, it's like they have the right idea about some stuff. Like it seems they talk a lot about like, like abortion rights and like protecting trans people and stuff like that. But they see the, they see the enemy within the bounds of electoral politics, right? They see there's the bad GOP, and then there's the good Dems, and it's kind of like, it's like constantly teetering at this little point here within this small thing where it's like, instead of looking at the larger picture. So I think that
Well, that's the mindset that you have to adopt in order to buy into this whole thing, right? You have to believe that this great country, this wonderful, amazing world superpower and number one country is also hanging on by a thread in this next election. And every single election after that, effectively, it's hanging on by a thread. So you're constantly like paying attention to like the minuscule crap that happens there, because you can't possibly fathom you can't comprehend that maybe it's not hanging on by a thread there. And also, what does it say about what does it say about this country if you really do think that one election could mean that everyone's in camps, like people, because liberals love to talk about camps.
Or that if the Dems win, that trans people are going to be, safe overnight, or like, it's, I don't know. To me, I don't know, maybe Kira and Dan, you have
We are the Americans. Yes, please acknowledge.
To me, it looks like, like if the Dems get in, it's still going to be, like Biden hasn't done shit about Palestine. He's wrung his hands. Biden could have.
No, Biden has done shit about Palestine. He's actively doing shit.
He made a little frown face, right?
No. I mean, like he's actively promoting and aiding the
Oh,
genocide.
right. Yeah. No. Like,
I know that might seem like it's nitpicking, and maybe Dan back me up on this, because a lot of people like to say like he hasn't done anything. He has done plenty. He is like actively like circumventing laws. He's trying to like do under the table deals. He's trying to free up the weapons, like all the weapon stockpiles that America has for Israel. He's like, normally it would be Israel has to ask for access to these things and we give you it, here and there. But he's like, I don't know if he's actually succeeded in doing this, but last I read, he was trying to make it so Israel has unfettered access to full weapons. Like he's absolutely active in this, to be clear.
And there was also, so, like obviously it's pretty much like unverifiable, but in Aaron Bushnell's statement, well, when they passed with the information that they shared, there was they were saying that they were leaking classified information about actual boots on the ground going over there, and the US Air Force getting directly involved. And obviously it's like, it's like there's no way to verify anything about that or anything like that, but like, yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't be a stretch. The American ships are already there, and we have like British intelligence flying overhead, and I'm sure it wouldn't be a huge stretch. I mean, we even have Americans that are enlisting, which is not the same thing, but like the American presence is there. It's just boots on the ground would make it even more harrowing,
So so Biden has said has expressed displeasure about the state of things in Palestine, while fully enabling it, and not even just enabling it, but directly.
I'd call it deep throating it.
Yeah, just full hog deep throating Israel, and like there's he could have done a lot to kind of help out trans people in a lot of the states that have been enacting pretty shitty legislation to kind of legislate them out of existence or push them out of public life. There's so many things he could have done, and at this point it's like, how are people supposed to believe that he's any better? Like I see like these libs like this, like it's like, how are they going to convince me at the foreign vote fraud person that like if I'm gonna commit voter fraud in the United States elections, how are they gonna get me to do it for Biden? Like I don't see it.
How dare you not do that? How dare you not vote blue? But that what you're saying brings us to like the glaring biggest point that I think we'd all agree is the biggest issue with voting. It's not access to the ballot box. It's access to representatives that actually represent you, right? We're seeing like the majority of Americans want a ceasefire in Palestine. And we see that our president of the Democratic Party, quote unquote, Democracy Party, is not actually pushing for a ceasefire. Yeah, we don't really have actual representatives. And also, at least in America, we were talking about this earlier in the segment, at least in America, we don't really vote on like issues as much as we do like a glorified job application process where we like create like a weird fandom around these applicants. And then we build up these fan fictions about them. And then we give them power and then we walk away. And that's politics.
You come back in a couple of years and you do it again.
Yeah, we come back in a couple of years and we're like, oh my God, we have to do that again or else everyone's going to die.
Yeah, or else it's actually fascism this time instead of the fascism that's been happening all along.
Dan, what was your sort of radicalization process as an American who, you know, I assume maybe used to vote? I don't even know, actually. You might be like a lifelong commie, or I don't know. Okay, yeah. What happened? What happened to you to make you an evil, radical leftist, literally a communist?
Who taught you that
happened?
word? Who taught you such a bad word like that? It's reality itself. You know, it's. I think it started off just having compassion for people, and it evolved from there. I was semi-involved in the Bernie Sanders campaign, and it led me to, you know, back to the topic of discussion here, which is that elections will not save us. It's part of a broader strategy, like subbing to my Patreon, patreon.com/iDanSimpson. No, seriously though, elections alone will not save us. And really, I should say that if you would have asked me this question a few years ago, or even maybe a few months ago, my answer would have been, I think, a lot different. You know, after the aftermath, after you know, the fallout or whatever of having supported Bernie and him sort of revealing himself for what he is, and even the system not even giving him a chance, that whole thing that radicalized me. And I think I would have, you know, I've recently, if you would have asked me, I would have said, no, don't participate at all in bourgeois style in bourgeois style elections. But I would say now that I've done a lot of homework and I've consulted Lenin and Stalin, and I feel like I can participate in this conversation in more depth. And I think one of the main things that I really want to get out there today is that my main argument about participating in bourgeois democracy or liberal democracy, or I guess as we're going to say today, just electoralism. You know, what is the communist line on it? What does Lenin believe? What does Stalin believe about it? And I like to think I've distilled some of their thoughts here. Participation in bourgeois democracy can be fruitful. You know, the opposite of what word we were using before. I can't remember. I'm sorry.
But didn't Lenin write a
yeah.
thing on that with a really funny title?
Yes. So in what was it? It's communism, left-wing communism. It's left-wing communism and infantile disorder. He gets into this, and I think I've distilled some of his thoughts. It can be fruitful under some conditions. One, when it's subordinated to the internationalist class struggle as a whole.
What does that mean? Can you explain that part?
Sure. When it's subordinated to having solidarity with the oppressed and working classes of people outside of your borders. You'll notice that some SOC Dems, some Dem SOCs, whatever, their solidarity ends at the border, and it's a fucking miracle if it extends past. For instance, Democracy Now! Is a great example of that. They have absolutely no solidarity outside that border, with the few exceptions that they get sometimes right, which is Palestine. At the same time, they've been getting that wrong a little bit too, but they've been peddling a little bit of IDF propaganda. So we got subordinated to the internationalist class struggle. Two, when the masses organize around a ballot measure or a revolutionary party candidate who's willing to act in a revolutionary way. and I can answer more questions about any of these, absolutely. But let me get to number 3, which is that, and it can be a little bit more fruitful, more so with local elections and ballot measures than so with national elections. You can imagine when you go vote for local elections, you have a lever of power, and that lever of power is pretty darn small, let's be honest, if it even exists. Versus if you go vote for national, federal elections, president, Congress people, etc., you have an infinitesimally small lever with which to work, if at all. So yeah, did you have a question about the second one? I think when the masses organize around a ballot measure or a revolutionary party candidate willing to act in a revolutionary way, is that what you want me to dig into?
Yeah, I wanted you to say, at least in America, if you think at least on the national scale, which the third point makes it a little less relevant. But on the national scale, do you see anybody that would even qualify?
That's the whole thing. That's the big condemnation of it. My answer before a few months ago would have been no. It's entirely futile. My answer now is no. It's somewhat futile, but it can be fruitful. But it's the whole thing is that you don't see anyone acting in this way. And what does it mean to act in a revolutionary way? It means, I think, a few different things, and I could dig into that if you like. I think by not subordinating the electoral or political struggle to the overall internationalist class struggle, like I mentioned before. Another way to do that is pretty much just to continue treating the electoral politics in the same way that we have. And another way that we need to another thing we need to avoid is by overly legitimizing bourgeois electoral politics, by treating it as the only form of class or liberation struggle. So if you're looking around the world and you're noticing the things that we're noticing, shit's fucked up. It's really bad out there. And if you only go and vote and you consider that your job done, like bada bing, bada boom, I'll see you in a couple more years, you're treating it as the only form of struggle. There are, if I can name a few different other forms of struggle, there's the economic struggle for better pay and better working conditions with the bosses. There's number 2, the theoretical struggle against anti-revolutionary tendencies. I'm talking bourgeois philosophy, liberals, fascistic, revisionist, economist, chauvinist, utopianist, and no hate, also anarchist as well. As Engels says, without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement.
Lenin's point in What Is to Be Done is kind of like the idea that, so there's the spontaneous trade unionist approach to organizing, which is kind of like, like all these unions work together and they gradually work towards what could be a revolution, but it's kind of like, everyone working separately or whatever. But in What Is to Be Done, he talks about an educated and actually a professional revolutionary group, like the Vanguard Party, who are completely dedicated to organizing towards the goal of revolution. And then, obviously doing all the things that a normal political party would do, but outside of the electoral system. But also, like in some places they have operated within the electoral system as well. But the idea of, and there's the idea of building dual power to the point where you can just go like, hey, who do you trust more, us or them? And we can just, seize the wheels of power, sort of thing. But yeah, no, I and also the legitimization of the capitalist state as well. That's the Rosa Luxemburg thing, right? In Reform or Revolution, she talks about the dangers of if you focus too much on these kind of, if you put too much weight on these systems, then people can just kind of people can feel like they've done their work. Lenin also talked about this as well, in What Is to Be Done, and I think also in State and Revolution, where it's like this is an outlet for people's political energy, and if they expend this little bit of energy they've got, they feel like they've done something good. But and it's like, okay, cool, like that is an going to vote is a very easy thing to do. It's like, you know, like there's arguments about if you should or if you shouldn't, but so for a lot of people, it's very easy. For some people, it's not. We can talk about that later. But yeah, you know, like the problem is when people just become, obviously too focused on that, which we've been talking about. But yeah, so there is this tradition talking about all these things that are still super relevant to the current situation that goes back over 100 years. Maybe we can do some like book recommendations right at the end or something like that.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're hitting really important points there, which is that it can strip the masses of revolutionary potential, and it can do it in many different ways. And I'd love to get into that if we have time. And it keeps them from participating in these other forms of struggle, the economic struggle, the theoretical struggle, as I mentioned. Also, and that's where we also have the political struggle. That's where we have these three forms of struggle, and then there's another form of struggle, I think, is exemplified by Al-Aqsa Flood, October 7th, which is the armed struggle. We don't really get to talk about that much here on the internet because you get a knock on your door if you do. Yeah. Another thing we want to avoid is by voting or supporting non-revolutionaries, liberals or other right-wingers or opportunists or careerists. And it could be sort of easy to do that. I think the last presidential election has been enlightening for a lot of people. That radicalized me. To be quite honest and open with you guys and fully transparent, I voted for Biden. It's a thing that completely embarrasses me right now because I was one of those people making the harm reduction arguments, but more like harm production. Am I right?
Whoa.
It's really sad.
Oh.
Yeah. So the thing is, by supporting somewhat progressive people, the bourgeoisie, the owning and the ruling classes, they have the resources, they have the ability to force more socialist type people to sacrifice their morals. If there's an issue that the bourgeoisie considers to be a weak part of their platform, they'll attack it. They'll run a candidate sort of attacking them on that position. And then that socialist, if they want to keep their seat, they have to they either have to genuflect, bend the knee to the owning and ruling classes and sacrifice their morals, or they lose their seat. And there are many such cases. So, also generally speaking, it's not a great idea to be, if you're just showing up to the polls and you're voting and you haven't organized, you're pissing into the wind at this point. It really is not worth your time. And another thing we should avoid is entryism. So trying to run candidates in an existing party and trying to trick yourself into thinking, oh, we can pull them left. That's a strategy that doesn't work.
Yeah. I think there's a fantastic example of this going on in UK politics at the moment. There was just a by-election, member of party election in a place near me called Rochdale, and the person that was elected there is a guy called George Galloway, and George Galloway is a reactionary, absolutely, 100%.
Transphobe.
Yeah, he's a transphobe.
Fedora wearer.
He's also what's surprising that a lot of people seem to be missing out is that he's an Islamophobe, and he has multiple times accused Humza Yousaf, who's the leader of the SNP, of like not being a Celt and therefore not being able to represent Scotland.
So it's like a birther movement thing.
Yeah. It's pretty like that. Yeah.
No true Scotsman.
Yes, literally no true Scotsman. Literally.
But like these niche racisms that you get in Europe, like
it's nuts. It's nuts, bro.
Yeah. But yeah, I saw him. He just he did that speech where he's like talking about spanking the cheeks of Keir and Rishi, and it's just
this is the thing, because here's what he's done. What everybody forgets about George Galloway is that he is absolutely what Dan was talking about. He is, he's not a revolutionary. He's an opportunist. He simply wants that MP salary. That's all he fucking wants. That's all most of the fucking MPs in this country want. Apart from like a very select few, like people that come to mind are like Claudia Webb, Jeremy Corbyn. But this is the thing. It's very like it's very telling that he is trying to weaponize the fact that Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are not speaking for the people. So you have that leftist recuperation. Leftist recuperation is so like prominent at the moment, where like there are basically liberals who are saying like quote unquote all the right things, but their heart is really not in any kind of struggle. And like Dan says, like the solidarity like ends at the border for sure, like for fucking sure. Like they're not talking about Palestine. They're not talking about any of the countries in the imperial periphery that are still suffering because of colonialism and neo-colonialism that's going on now. So, you know, George Galloway is like it's like a very interesting like look at it, where the two main parties were completely fucked, and they were, you know, the people of Rochdale were given like a choice. And what happened was, it wasn't it. And to be absolutely like honest, I don't think it was because of his pro-Palestinian views. I really don't. Like Rochdale does have a large Muslim population, but I just think it's because people knew who George Galloway is, because he's been on Big Brother. Don't Google George Galloway drinks milk like a cat. Don't Google that.
I didn't realize it was that guy.
Yeah, it's that guy. It's him. It's he drank milk like a cat on Big Brother.
Ridiculous thing. Like even the video that of him giving his speech about spanking butt cheeks or whatever.
Yeah, he's a freak.
What is wrong with your island?
It has the energy of the Arrested Development. What is it, like the Alliance of Magicians? And they're all like, we demand to be taken seriously. And in this George Galloway thing, he's wearing a fedora. There's a bunch of guys in like top hats. And there's like one guy that looks like, I don't know, I think it's like an anime all over print suit. And there's just like lots of things going on. It's a very like, we demand to be taken seriously moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, just to let the podcast listeners know, Dan's face as he was clearly looking up the clip I just mentioned was a picture. Wish I could show it. Yeah,
It's hilarious.
He said, "Don't Google it."
Yeah,
I do what I'm told. I don't do what I'm told. I do the opposite.
Clearly, I didn't do it, Mule.
Well done, Kira. You're a very good friend. Thank you. And I do keep telling you not to come to England, but
I think I will, and I just
you
want
insist
to.
upon it.
I'm very good at following directions. Like do you know a lot of men don't read the directions on things?
Oh, well, I am a man, so I do know that.
I've been hanging out with one of my friends, and he never reads instructions, and it's become a persistent issue. And he does not. He doesn't even care. And I just want to let everyone know it's good. You should check out the directions on the products you buy to see the proper way to use them. All right.
Oh, I thought you meant like map directions, because that's also true.
I was thinking like operating heavy machinery.
Just simple things. Okay, we can cut this out in post. And it's just a little irk of mine. Just men just refuse to read the instructions on things.
You needed to get that out. It's fine.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I support you, comrade.
I'm also the only woman here, so this is my feminist moment.
Yeah. Marxist feminist moment. It's true. Yeah. Men are not good revolutionaries when they don't read the directions on.
I didn't read the theory.
Conditioner. Yeah, literally didn't read the theory. So yeah, no, and as some people in the chat are pointing out, George Galloway wasn't even the most dangerous person on the on the voting on the ballot sheet. There was a bunch of people on there, including Simon Danchuk, who was disgraced because it was found out that he was grooming young girls on his phone, and he was running on the issue. There is a sort of single issue in Rochdale that is like intensified to the point of complete frustration for people like me who like have been to Rochdale and organized there and have organizations and stuff like that, where they talk about this like couple of gangs of men, and they were Asian men, and they're using that as like the reactionary talking point of like, you know, Muslims are coming over here, they're being pedophiles, they're grooming our young girls and stuff like that. And like, while this is like a definite thing that happened, it is unfortunately like the catalyst for like all this reactionary stuff that goes on all over the country, actually. And people started to claim things like there are grooming gangs all over the UK. It was like literally specifically sort of concentrated in Rochdale. And Simon Danchuk was like running on that issue, even though he's literally groomed girls.
Yeah.
you
I mean,
know,
it's like the
so
same thing. Like all these, you see all these like tradcath kind of types that are like obsessed with this same idea, and it's like, hey, yeah, the grooming gangs are organized around fucking Catholic churches, and they got this network, and like, it's like it's only really a problem when it's someone that doesn't like look or dress like them, right?
I think, yeah, and it's such a, this is the reason that I'm bringing up this election is not just because it's pertinent and it's a recent thing. No, it is because it's pertinent. It's not just because it's a recent thing. Sorry, my fucking brain. It's not just because it's a recent thing. It's because it's pertinent in the sense that like it is a joke, right? So when you like, so you want to believe you're a liberal, you want to believe that we've got democracy in the UK. Okay, so the two main parties that are like the only choice kind of go by the wayside, like no one wants to vote for them, kind of thing. And your result is George Galloway, who like stands on what? Like he's gonna like say in Parliament, what's happening in Gaza shouldn't be happened. That's good. That's a good thing. That's like a good positive thing. But all the rest of this stuff, it's sort of like a little sketchy. And he kind of has what a lot of people in the UK called SWP vibes, and SWP are the Socialist Worker Party, who are like, they're just opportunists when it comes to organizing any kind of anti-racist action. They will be like, we did that, and then they'll post all the protesters' faces all over social media.
Oh yeah,
yeah, really, really clever,
I know
good
the
stuff.
type.
Yeah. And that's kind of what the Workers' Party of Britain does. I've seen them multiple times give out placards with their logo on and stuff at pro-Palestine protests. I mean, let's face it, the Green Party also does this. So, what I'm doing is I'm trying to point out that like these are all just the same. They just do the same stuff. And while some of them might be saying like good things, again, like Dan says, we shouldn't be seeing this as like the be all end all. The system is a joke. It's like a clown show. And that's kind of the majority of the time how we should be referring to it.
It's a clown show with power.
Yeah. It's a lie. It's something that is said to us like, oh, you're 18, you have the right to vote, go ahead and do it. And it's like, okay, cool. And then you like vote for the first time and you vote for someone random because you don't really understand it, and you're like, that's it. Do you know what I mean? That's it. Like, nothing changes. But yeah, no. So I wanted to bring that up, and I think what you also said, Dan, about local elections is really important, because local elections, definitely in the UK, is something I was going to ask you about the US actually, and then this is probably true in Aotearoa as well. You in local elections have the opportunity to elect someone in the UK to a council, and councils have a bit of power in their local area with various things like controlling landlords, what kind of money is spent on local services like doctor services, what else, like trash removal, these kinds of things. If these are like issues that you are experiencing in your local area, then you can look at a local councillor and you can go, okay, well, are they saying that they're wanting to do stuff that will make my immediate material life better? Right now, that may not necessarily sound revolutionary to you, but if they're alleviating poverty, then that's kind of a step, right? If they're trying to,
we had an episode about revolutionary reform, and I think that would apply here, where I forgot the exact criteria, but one of the criteria of revolutionary reform is, does the reform enable people to better be situated to do revolutionary acts or organize?
that's exactly what I was getting
And
at.
if you're not like scrounging for like food and trash cans, you have more ability to organize and, to do revolution.
Exactly, yeah.
So I was mentioning earlier, sort of the conditions under which it's futile or not fruitful to be participating in electoralism. Would you guys like for me to sort of hash out the other side of that coin, in which the ways in which the conditions in which it could be fruitful?
I insist you do.
Well, it's I think it's really important that we start this conversation talking about what those fruits can be reached, what goals can be achieved via electoralism, because we shouldn't have any illusion that the liberation of the working and oppressed masses is going to come from the ballot. I think one of the things that we could be hoping for by participating in elections, either by running or supporting candidates or just voting or whatever, is to slow or pause the system which and slow and pause the system temporarily at best from lurching further to the right, because that's what it's doing right now. And I think if we look at elections, we see that we have this ratchet effect in motion, whereby the Democrats prevent any movement any movement to the left, and the Republicans keep ratcheting it to the right.
So I take it from this analysis that you were not an advocate of like accelerationism or any of that, where we need to go so far that people all collectively go, wow, we have to do something, or whatever the
We need to
fantasy
make people
is.
suffer as much as possible so that they realize how bad it is.
Right. Which is always amazing, because the people that are advocating for this perspective don't think of themselves as being one of the people that's suffering. They're like, we need other people to suffer.
I think it's generally, like, in my experience, people that have kind of done the whole like accelerationism are the people that are actually insulated from the worst kind of effects of what could happen.
They're the same type of people that find right-wing libertarianism appealing, because they think of themselves as always able-bodied, always not requiring a doctor, always have access to conveniences. They can't comprehend not having these things because they're so living in their bubble, and therefore they advocate for these ideas.
Until their parents are killed in the first purge, and then they're out on their own. And
Yeah, accelerationism is inherently reactionary. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're saying that we need to take steps to prevent the further right movements, and that the Democratic Party notably does not allow for a leftward movement, and then the right-wing party keeps progressing us to the right. And sometimes as a treat, the Democratic Party does as well. So
I would agree with that. And I also think we need to realize that our leaders, our owning and ruling classes, don't just influence domestic policies, they influence the rest of the world. And one of our goals would be to hopefully get as much relief as we could for people in the global south and dependent countries. We need to end sanctions on various countries. We need to oppose imperialist and colonialist wars and covert ops. And we need to oppose Western bankers' control of international monetary policy via the IMF and the World Bank, the money domination of overexploited and underdeveloped countries, the debt traps that we put them into, which we, of course, project onto China as they're building out their Belt and Road initiative. There you go. There you go. So I think electoralism can be fruitful, starting with those things in mind, and then it could be fruitful when you organize. Again, if you just show up to the ballot box, you're not doing it. You're not doing a democracy. I hate to break it to you.
Well, that's what, like, a lot of people will look at. They'll look at Lenin's arguments if I would think if they don't read the whole thing, or if they just read a quote or whatever like that, and think that this means we should abandon electoralism. Whereas, like, in What Is to Be Done, the whole point is that people shouldn't devote all of their time to electoralism. Like, he wasn't saying don't do it. He was just saying, like, we need to move people away from just focusing on this too much, like, this is just a very small part of the bigger picture.
Can I ask a question? And this is totally off script from what you're talking about. I hope you don't mind. What do you think about the idea that people don't want to vote because they don't want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Not like acknowledge the system, but they don't want to like gratify the system with their vote, basically. Like
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we were talking about earlier with the Rosa Luxemburg thing, where it's like that kind of
legitimizing, right? What are your thoughts on that, based on your understanding of theory, but also personally? Because I've always taken the position where there's a lot of very base people, especially now, that don't want to legitimize the system with a vote. But at the end of the day, I don't think the US government is going to be like, oh, we didn't get enough votes, so we're going to start backing Palestinians. I don't really see, I don't know the material push that's going to happen if a lot of us just refuse to vote. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
I think this Lenin quote actually sort of gets at what you're saying, and let me know if it doesn't. He says, "We Bolsheviks, and those were the communists, participated in the most counter-revolutionary parliaments, and experience has shown that this participation was not only useful but indispensable to the party of the revolutionary proletariat." So obviously, he's framing that in terms of participating in the in electoralism, but with a revolutionary party, supporting revolutionary party candidates. And obviously, we're not talking about Democrats here.
Right. So sorry, if so the counter revolutionary aspect of that, if I'm recalling your quote, is the participation in bourgeois politics, period, through via electoralism.
Well, in the quote, he's describing the counter-revolutionary parliaments. So very much like a counter-revolutionary democracy, very much like ours. And he's effectively saying it's not counter-revolutionary to participate in electoralism. He's encouraging it. He's encouraging it. If anything, he says we should use our criticism. We should criticize our leaders, and we shouldn't criticize. He says criticism should be directed not against bourgeois democracy or electoralism, but those leaders who are unable or unwilling to utilize the bourgeois democratic elections and the bourgeois democratic platform in a revolutionary and communist manner. So the opposite side of that coin is we can support candidates who are willing to use the platform in a revolutionary and communist way. One that draws the masses into the struggle, the international class struggle for the working and oppressed masses, in a way that educates the masses. Lenin says participation in parliamentary elections and in the struggle on the parliamentary rostrum or platform is obligatory on the party of the revolutionary proletariat, specifically for the purpose of educating the backward strata of its own class, and for the purpose of awakening and enlightening the undeveloped, downtrodden, and ignorant rural masses. And again, that's from left-wing communism.
I will say that fuck Bernie, as much as I hate to say fuck Bernie, but at the same time, Bernie Sanders, and I remember saying this at the, when he lost. I still think that his running was one big advertisement for whatever the hell he was advocating for, quote unquote democratic socialism, whatever the hell he's labeled it as. But him running, having that platform, being on national television, like, you know, Biden and the rest of those assholes having to like do something about it and kind of showing their whole hand to many of us, including me, and therefore radicalizing me to the point where now I'm a terrorist according to Twitch. So like it advertised so much political ideology. Now I don't 100% agree with his political ideology, but I do agree with a lot of it. His criticism of the ruling class, so on and so forth. I think there's still a lot of cogent parts of his platform. Obviously, we know better than to think that him in his entirety is revolutionary. But from that, what you're saying, I 100% agree with that. Simply running and having that platform, like it forces the issues to the surface, and it does provoke in some people that education to happen.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's counter-revolutionary, for instance, to run a communist for president. Again, I think we should not be under any illusion that they'll be allowed to win. However, one of the reasons and one of the purposes of participating in these in electoralism or bourgeois democracy, which, by the way, is obviously not a democracy, as you guys mentioned. It's an oligarchy. It's a democracy for the bourgeois. It's increasingly a plutocracy, and even increasingly so, a gerontocracy. It's run by old white fucking people, rich white people, right? So one of the things that we could be trying to achieve is to, and one of the hopes or one of the goals, or what am I trying to say, is that if we're going to run someone for instance, for a federal position, we can use that as an opportunity to gauge the revolutionary potential of the masses. That's one of the main things that we should be doing when we're participating. But also to act in a revolutionary, in a communist way means, I think if you do get a seat, or even if you don't get a seat as you're running, it's to illustrate the point. Illustrate the fact that the bourgeois democracy is not the path to liberation for the masses, as in to say, the system isn't meant to liberate us from the system. But I think a lot of times what happens is that people think of voting as moving a needle, however small our lever to move the needle may be. We just think we're moving the needle. If we just vote harder, the needle will move to the left, and then eventually it will liberate the masses. But really, we have to remember that the needle moves left to right within specific bounds that are not decided by the masses of the people. So we really need to imagine the needle completely somewhere else that we've never seen before. And I think that it would help a lot of people to realize that, they'll only allow us to move the needle so far left, and it's really not moving left. It's just preventing the needle from going farther right because
That's
it's
the
always going
ratchet.
farther right. That's the
Ratchet effect. So with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about the uncommitted movement, because I think that has been quite an interesting development on how people engage with electoral politics, certainly in the US. I'm not sure if we'll see something like this in the UK, because I think, unfortunately, lots of people are just desperately well, I could talk at length about the problems with Britain, but let's not go there. We've done that a lot on this show already. It's America's turn. But yeah, no, the uncommitted vote, we spoke a little bit about this, me, Tim and Kira, just before we went live. But this is a movement whereby the primary result for the Democratic Party in Michigan, and I'm not just going to state the numbers that are given straight away because they could be confusing, and I want everybody to understand the entirety of this. So there are 10 million people in Michigan. Around 7 million of those are of voting age, right? Possible to vote, whether they have voter ID or whether they're stopped from voting or gerrymandered, whatever, however they're oppressed in the voting system. And only 1 million people turned up, roughly 1 million, out of that 7 million. And 100,000 of that million voted uncommitted. So that's a really interesting insight into not only, and when you look at Joe Biden, how Joe Biden performed in Michigan, the primary results in Michigan in 2020, it was not marginally better, it was massively better. He did much better. He got 600,000 votes as a result of this primary, and I think it was somewhere along the lines of 800 or something like that. I might be getting the numbers wrong, but yeah, this was 13% of the vote roughly. I might be getting the actual number wrong, but it was about 13% of the vote that went to uncommitted. So what are your thoughts on that, Dan? Do you think that having the uncommitted vote is letting people know there isn't enough of a revolutionary guy for us, or do you think this is maybe, I don't know, liberals engaging in their first sort of I don't like electoral politics before they go further left?
I don't have fully baked thoughts about this, but it would seem to me.
Neither do I.
Yeah,
don't worry.
it would seem to me that this is helping us to gauge the revolutionary potential of the masses, and they're not even supporting a candidate, a revolutionary candidate, but it does seem as though that we're able to get a little sneak peek into the frustration. These people aren't just not voting, which, by the way, is the biggest voting block of potential voters. More people stay home than vote for Democrat. More people stay home than vote for Republican, for instance, for president. However, them coming out and voting uncommitted and doing it in such large numbers, in such a way where if that were extrapolated, I think, to the whole of the United States, that it would show us that Biden wouldn't win. I heard something, I can't remember what the stat was, but if one out of 100 Biden voters didn't vote for Biden in the upcoming election, in that last election, he wouldn't have won. So he can't lose 13%. If he can't lose 1% of his voters, he cannot lose 13%, which does not explain the confidence of many sort of Democrat establishment talking heads that we see on Twitter.
Also, to jog everyone's memory, Biden only did win because of how much Trump bungled COVID effectively. there was a mass, but at least that was the way that it went down on my side the way that I saw it. It wasn't because Biden had such a great platform. No one knew his platform. It was because of the massive like anti-Trump like sentiment that Democrats were pushing, and focusing on COVID, which if you notice, Biden doesn't give a fuck about COVID now, which is very interesting. So like, is he going to have a similar kind of like, fairy godmother kind of event occur? No. And we see how hard he's dropping the ball with Palestine, which is probably tip of everyone's mind right now. So I don't think he's going to win.
Everybody, I think I've forgotten about this, whatever it was, which proves that even if there was some kind of good thing that he would do to change people's opinions of him, that me literally forgetting what this good thing that he did a few weeks ago is kind of evidence of that. I can't remember what it was. I think he did something like student debt relief. Maybe was that a thing that he did? And it was like a little bit of student debt relief.
Yeah.
Like
overpromised and underdelivered.
Yeah. So it's just completely whatever he thinks that he could do to get people to, forget this. It will not. It is going to be the defining thing of his presidency. This will be the open eye moment of lots of people everywhere that the US is participating in genocides all over the world, like not just Palestine, but pretty much everywhere it puts its horrific blood-covered hands. In terms of getting people to understand, and like you said, like engaging the revolutionary potential of the voter base, that's the most important thing that we need to be able to take from this. And if we could put that 100,000 people who were ready to get up and go out and vote into like a stadium together, right, and have someone like Julius Malema from the EFF do like a big speech to them, right? Do you know what I mean? Then that would be pretty damn good.
That's another use for protests, by the way. Protests help to do that too, because we were talking before about protests saying some disparaging things, but also saying some complimentary things about its use in like a kind of a tapestry of different things. And in my opinion, when I go out to a protest and I see a lot of people that are showing up for a cause, it shows me, wow, I didn't realize that there were so many people that agreed with what I not my entire ideology, but at least with this particular part of it. And they're also being told to say certain things. They're like, the chants can be very radical, right? They can be very, and they're also very like handy. Like sometimes I'll just revert back to them as like, I'm like, oh yeah, that's true, and I'll think of like a certain saying, a certain chant from a protest. So I do think protests are effective in that regard too.
To go back to your question, I am honestly personally undecided as to what I'm going to do. If I'm going to vote for free Palestine or uncommitted, or I'm obviously not going to vote for Biden, and definitely not Trump. Like, don't get me wrong, but I may end up voting for the PSL candidates. I'm really just not sure. It's unimportant to me, to be quite honest. It's not my main form of struggle. But the weird thing is that we get told over and over again, if you're uncommitted, if you're not voting for Biden, it's a vote for Trump. And it's just like, what? Well, hold on. By that logic as well, if I don't vote for Trump, it's a vote for Biden. So if I don't vote, I'm voting twice. That's incredible. What is this literal math?
Way more democracy.
I'm getting so much democracy just by not even voting.
That's true.
Yeah, it is interesting. And down here we have MMP system, so mixed member proportional. So minor parties actually get there's just a way more reason to vote for minor parties. It's basically like they have to form a parliament out of they have to have over half the amount of seats, and so generally like this will be one of the major parties, like it'll be National or Labour, and then often it's a coalition partner with a partnership with a smaller party. So in the past it's been like usually it's like one or two parties. So it'll be like, if it's a Labour, then usually it's like the Greens and the Maori Party. And then for National, it'll be like the Libertarian ACT Party and like the kind of nationalist NZ First Party. And so on one side, it's kind of like you get shitty things like our coalition government at the moment, which is so the National Party, which are kind of like the center right conservatives, the ACT Party that are like the Tea Party libertarians, and then NZ First, who are like kind of the shitty New Zealand nationalists. And this means that obviously these niche parties get more representation in parliament, which had been great in the past for for the Greens and the Maori Party, for being able to actually push like environmental policy, pro-Maori policy, stuff like that. But at the moment, these coalition partners that basically National can't govern without them, they lose their majority. They've been able to push through some pretty extremist policies because they basically have the bigger party cucked, right? Like if they withdraw their support, then they have to form a new government, which they probably wouldn't be able to do because there's no other parties unless they decided to, like form a government with one of the left-leaning parties. But it would basically trigger another election, which they would probably lose. So so you get this like thing where it's like, okay, like I can vote for one of these smaller parties, and even if they don't get in, they will hopefully still get seats in the House. If they have like a couple percent of the total thing, they'll still get seats in Parliament. They can still vote on things. They can still actually affect things, and sometimes in a pretty decent way. Like there's only been a few times the Maori Party hasn't actually been in government, but as opposition, they've actually managed to achieve quite a lot. So just having them there is good. But whereas, like I think in the States, it's pretty different. It's kind of like if you vote for a really independent party or whatever, a lot of people say this is like throwing away a vote or whatever. But what do the Americans think about that? Like Dan and Kira, do you think what's voting for an independent party? Is it like, is there a strategy to that? Is there a long-term kind of payoff to that? What do you guys think?
I would just fold it into my previous analysis, keeping in mind, what goals can be achieved in electoralism, keeping in mind, some of these pitfalls that we want to avoid. I'm thinking about how, we got Fetterman, you know what I mean? And the argument was, well, this is harm reduction. He's a progressive and he's running against a fake doctor.
And next minute, he's like, wearing an Israeli flag as a cape and like yelling at protesters.
For the record, he wasn't the next minute doing that. He was an unabashed pro-Zionist and he was an unabashed Zionist prior to his election. And he said, if I am elected, I will use my power and I will leverage it for better U.S.-Israeli relations. So I was telling everyone this guy sucks since day one, and I was getting all this garbage pushback from assholes on the internet.
But he wears sweatpants though.
he wears basketball shorts.
He wears shorts.
He's really big. He's a very large man. So if you really think about it.
And
isn't that what we all want?
It's just such a funny sentiment, really, isn't it? We're going to improve Israel-US relations. How does it get better for Israel?
I know, right? It's like, I think that relationship is pretty fucking way too good, to be honest. It's
But just to say that, like, these like non-revolutionary, like aesthetically leftist, like, oh, he wants to legalize marijuana, isn't that such a win type candidates are not like our saviors. No one is our savior, for the record, but especially these assholes, especially when they show their full hand on Palestine.
So to chime back in, I would say that, having admitted that I supported Biden and I made the harm reduction argument, I'm noticing people now. I'm sorry, having supported Biden and now realizing how big of a mistake it was. I'm never going to be duped again. I simply will never be duped again. I have to have learned this lesson. Otherwise, I'll just be that same old liberal that I was. And the same has to be the case for Fetterman. And it can't just be we learn from our lesson and go, okay, well, I'm never voting for Biden again. I'm never going to vote for Fetterman again or support these people, which we see a ton of rad lib streamers and content creators who breathlessly supported Fetterman. who act like they learned their lesson, but on the other out of the other side of their mouth, they'll say, "Oh, well, he was just like a typical Democrat. How could we have known that he was going to be this bad?" And it's just like, well, you actually haven't learned, have you? You like, especially us as content creators, as like public figures. It's really important that if when we make a mistake, we learn from it and demonstrate to our audiences that we've learned from it. I see there's so many cases of these people who act like they've learned the lesson of Fetterman, but they have not, and that drives me bonkers. These rad libs.
Yeah, confidently fucking wrong. Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. Sorry, Kira, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Dan just said, because and this is less to do with electoralism and more to do with kind of like a content creation world, of because there's a lot of political content creators that are scumbags like through and through. And a lot of people come to me and they're like, because I have demonstrated many times kind of what appears but to some people to be like a savant ability to be able to nab the assholes before they get fully and completely exposed to the world through like a call out threat or something, right? And people always ask me, oh, is this person bad? Is that person bad? I'm like, you got to stop thinking about people as like these individual people, and that particular person with that particular name is the bad person. This isn't how people are. One, people aren't, we can go into the whole philosophical route of like talking about, are people bad entirely? I don't, it's hard for me to say yes, although Netanyahu, yes, he is completely bad. But it's less about like naming the names and be like, okay, now this person's in the bad list. Now I put them in the bad list forever. And the reason I know they're bad is because I know a specific bad thing, and now they're bad. I don't like to encourage this type of like labeling of people. I'd rather encourage people to start thinking more critically. Like what Dan is saying, it's not about, is Biden the bad guy? Yeah, he sucks, but like, why does he suck? Why does Fetterman suck? What are the patterns? What is the system that we're examining here, so we can actually apply it and maybe have a maybe not fall for the next like scam artist that comes along? Because you can't just keep calling out specific people after the fact, after they've damaged. You have to start looking at patterns. You have to think critically.
Yeah, this is kind of important with my next point, because I wanted to bring up some more UK politics, but this is actually about Ireland, really, more specifically. So Sinn Féin, who are the sort of left-wing nationalist, democratic socialist party that want a reunified Ireland against colonialism, the colonialism of the British, have like historically engaged in electoral politics in a really interesting way. So, for example, I don't know if anyone knows this, but in Northern Ireland, they have a bunch of seats. They've got more now than they did, but they got 7 seats in the UK House of Commons, and they abstain from participating in UK politics because they're not interested in UK politics. They're interested in the reunification of Ireland. They're interested in anti-colonialist.
By the way, that's happening this year.
Yeah, literally the Irish reunification of 2024. I have been watching Star Trek: The Next Generation recently.
Same.
So yeah, have you? I knew it. I knew that we had to get you on the show. There was just something.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're all getting
Wigging in
pilled.
my
This
head.
is great. And then
Yeah.
you'll watch DS9 and you'll like it a lot.
I'm
So,
excited.
yeah.
But yeah, no. So yeah, the Irish reunification of 2024. Hopefully, let's go. But you know, the way that Sinn Féin engage in the, and again, you know, are they a revolutionary party? They're a democratic socialist party. They stand for left wing nationalist. You know, they've been described as centre left to left wing. So you know, they're not necessarily looking to like completely overhaul the system, but they're potentially, you know, after some non-reformist reforms, some abolitionist reforms, and they are deeply anti-colonialist, right? So I think that's another interesting way to look at how, you know, people can engage in electoral politics. Like if you're in Northern Ireland, for example, yeah, you could vote for Sinn Féin, even if you know that they're not going to get in. even if you know that they're not going to get in, then it's more of like you are signaling to everybody who knows and judges that data that actually this is the revolutionary, well, not necessarily revolutionary, but the anti-colonialist, which is revolutionary in a way, like I guess like an independent sort of like throwing off the
It's
shackles.
necessary for revolution.
Yeah, it's necessary for revolution, right? So you can measure how many people want to do that, right? If you vote Sinn Féin, for example.
Yeah. Also, interesting that, well, it's like Sinn Féin were keep close ties to the Provisional Irish Republican Army, and like the official thing is that they are two separate entities, but there have been people that have gone from the IRA into Sinn Féin, and they So I think that they there are a lot of people. I mean, and it's like the same kind of thing. There've been these like same things with a lot of Palestinian groups as well, where it's like there are people that have been active militant revolutionaries that have like entered establishment parties, and to some people on the radical side of things, they say like this is them becoming more liberal, this is them kind of defanging themselves, whereas other people are saying no, this is evidence of their that they're about it, that they're talking the talk and stuff like that. I'll leave it to the Irish to decide which is which, but it is exactly the same thing in Maori politics as well. So
right, exactly. And when we're talking about how the establishment decides to promote who is the good and who is the bad, Sinn Féin are a great example of that, because of course the Brits have been engaged in colonialism in Northern Ireland for, fucking centuries, really. And in the 90s, when Gerry Adams, the leader of Sinn Féin, was speaking on TV, they used to literally mute him and have an actor like speak over it's just so absurd, like because they were like he can't, if we let him say anything he'll say some revolutionary shit, and we don't need the people to hear that. Like that was kind of what it was about, but they've just literally just used to repeat exactly what he said, because he never said anything I would say remotely out of the beyond the pale, like for what would be.
How would they justify that? Would they be like, oh, he's got a bit of a thick accent, so we're just overdubbing him or something like that?
No,
or...
I think it was generally like these are the bad guys, because that's how it was posited in the news and everything like that. Like the Troubles were always called the Troubles. In terms of like, oh well, we don't quite understand it. It's like so similar to Israel. So like don't talk about it. It's complex, but like no, it's not. It's very simple actually. It's colonialism, and they're resisting colonialism. So in terms of like what the establishment telling you who's good and who's bad, but also like it kind of goes in line with Fetterman. Like Fetterman is like, oh, he's a cool guy, he's a liberal, like, oh, he's gonna vote for marijuana and stuff like that. And like conversely, anyone who's like a bit left of him is like, oh no, they're a weirdo actually, and like, or they might like focus on like a tweet that they made, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, like, look, this you actually, so yeah, no, I just wanted to sort of point out the Sinn Féin stuff, because I think that's a really interesting way. Like they just do not take their seats in Parliament. They just don't. They don't participate in UK politics. They don't do anything, like that. So, yeah.
To try to tie this all together here, and to also reflect on one of the myriad ways in which our democracy is undemocratic. In the United States, there are really no consistent mechanisms for the masses to recall Congress people or the president, such as Fetterman. That would be a great example, or Kirsten Sinema. Only 18 states currently allow recall, but that's just within the state. The United States Constitution does not allow for recall of elected federal officials. Whereas, for instance, Cuba and the DPRK, they both have internal and public recall. So that's one of these conditions.
I'm constantly bringing up those examples to people, and it's like just wild that everyone seems to think they know how Cuba and the DPRK and even like the USSR operated, and like that it was like these like very like tyrannical, like authoritarian kind of like regimes or anything like that. But when you actually look into it, the actual fact is that, yeah, like I was saying earlier, they have a system that is like far more like it's a more direct democracy that has a lot more accountability. Than than America, than the UK, than New Zealand and Australia. It's yeah, it's wild, and it's actually like I think for a lot of people learning about that is a really like it can be a quite radicalizing thing to be like, oh wait a minute, so like they can vote. It's just that like their voting just looks different to ours, or that, there's other systems that are possible, that it doesn't have to be just like this. Yeah. I think it's really interesting, and I love talking about it. I want to learn more, and yeah, I'm always looking for actual first-hand accounts. I'd love to go to DPRK one day.
Well, have
Like,
we spoken at all, just like sort of like in layman's terms, about how it works in Cuba? Because I think this should just like really open people's eyes. Anyone who might be listening, I would be really, really impressed actually if there are people who are still in our audience who are like a bit liberal about Cuba and a little bit scared of like, oh, they're actually, I saw like, listen, I'm an anarchist communist. I'm well aware that like, there have been certain like fucking anarchist movements against communism in the past, and I don't agree with them. I think I'm a believer in pragmatism. I'm a believer in the revolution. I'm a believer in progress, and that like certain things come from progress and stuff. But I saw a fucking anarchist account talking about how like Cuba was basically just doing imperialism because they have like prisons, and I was like, okay, man, all right, whatever. Anyway, listen, I just had to bring that up because there are people who think that, and you really just need to like stop for a minute and like look at the broader picture. Do you know what I mean? When people are telling you that this is like stupid shit that you need to just shut up about, like what they mean is that actually in the broader scheme of things, Cuba is like a very democratic country actually, and I'm going to talk to you about that now. You can literally just write the name of a person that you want to elect in Cuban democracies. You could just fucking write their name and their address on a piece of paper and give it to the ballot box. And the way that works is, I'm not sure about like the various different levels of it. I saw a great documentary called Belly of the Beast that I'd recommend to everybody. It was like funded by Danny Glover and another person. It's this Cuban woman called Liz, and she goes around and she basically introduces you to all these like various different like Cuban political workings and stuff. And the one on elections was really interesting because it's just basically like there are so many examples of like of just the most people coming out to vote in Cuba, just like an overwhelming majority of people voting. And it's not because like people are saying like, oh, they're forced to, and it's like they'll put in prison if they don't vote. No, that's fucking nonsense. It's not based in any kind of reality whatsoever. You're fully free to not vote in Cuba. The reality of it is that people actually know that their vote makes a difference. They're allowed to vote on various referendums about policy. They're able to like, literally have freedom to elect who they want. There are party members who you elect, and essentially like the member of the Communist Party that you elect is like the guy that you go to for problems in your local area. Essentially, that's who you vote in that specific regard. And then I think there are like ministerial elections as well. So it's like people who make like sort of big decisions in government as well. Think about if you could control who the minister of like education was in the UK. That would be fucking like, are you joking? Like, what we have to do is sit there and go, oh, Rishi Sunak has appointed a vile reactionary who used to support the Nazi party in 1945. You know what I mean? It's just like any guy, like literally any fucking guy that he wants, versus you could just elect that. You could just elect a guy that you want, you know what I mean? Rather than this horrific person that Rishi Sunak loves and is probably going to be like siphoning a bunch of public money to behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really fascinating learning about particularly I find like socialist states and all these kind of places, the different ways that they engage with this like direct democracy. Yeah, I think it's like, it is like, I've looked at the Cuban system a couple times. It is kind of confusing. I know there's like different levels of it. There's like the day-to-day kind of parliament, and then above them there's like another committee, and then there's like a Congress, and it's like, yeah, but it is really interesting. And I think it's like when it's presented plainly to people, they go, oh, actually this sounds really good. Like this makes sense, right? So yeah, I think it's something that I really like talking about with people about, like, like, we always talk about a big thing on Red Planet has always been about political imagination, right? Like imagining things working differently to how they do at the moment, to like imagining better futures and all this kind of stuff. And I think that real world examples of things like this that are happening, like at the moment, like in Cuba, really important, part of that, like imagining, especially in a country like New Zealand, where it's like, where as a smaller country, I think the potential for large political shift is a lot more achievable. It's a lot more like it wouldn't take as much organizing, and like a place like the States is gigantic, right? There's so many different levels of things and different structures and stuff, whereas I think somewhere like New Zealand could really take for a leaf from Cuba's book, and have a radical, like a revolution, without too much. I think like it's a conceivable future, not like a distant future. So yeah.
While you were talking about that, I was thinking about the people who criticize DPRK or Cuba for being a one-party system, despite the fact that it's a party for the masses, whereas they'll support the American system or other similar systems. In the United States, it's is the Julius Nyerere quote here. The U.S. is also a one-party state, but with typical American extravagance, they have two of them.
Yeah.
That is so fucking true. Holy
Yeah,
shit.
they convince us that there's actually two different parties, despite the fact that, if you look at a Venn diagram of what they support and what they believe in, and if you apply a Marxist analysis to it, especially, you'll find that they support the same shit, but they do this kayfabe thing where they make it seem like they're completely different by arguing about the things that are on the fringes of that Venn diagram, which mostly overlaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kayfabe is a really good way to kind of frame it. But yeah, no, I think absolutely. And it's, like people get all upset about like they hear phrases like dictatorship of the proletariat, and they're just like, wow, oh, dictatorship, like, oh, or even like authoritarianism. It's kind of like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, like America already exists within, like a dictatorship of capital, and it's like an authoritarian system, but it's like, these unelected, like, like to use the scary Russian term, but like, oligarchs and stuff. And it's like, there's, it's, I think the reality of, what, like a dictatorship of the proletariat and all that kind of thing is actually way less scary than the reality of what the American system already is, right? Like,
Well, let's talk about how you can easily pick that out in the fact that, like, you hear a lot of people say about how, like, Stalin put queer people in prison, right? You hear that all the fucking time. And it's like, well, actually, that's true, but it was for a lot less time than people were put in prison for in the United States. And also in Britain, they actually fucking killed them. So, like, I don't know, man. It seems like they weren't as bad. They might have been like a bit bad, but like definitely not as bad as like what we were doing.
yeah, like it's like that same kind of thing where it's like, people will talk about the like the racism of like past governments, or like anything like that, or like obviously like the homophobia or transphobia and all this kind of thing. And it's just like, well, look what's happening, look what's happening in the UK right now, look what's been happening in America. It's it's like one of these things where it's like, how come, so you have a problem with it in this historical kind of example, but you're you know, in some cases, these critics are fans of it, and you know, like they're like, oh, you're big queer rights fan now, are you? Great, you know, awesome, fucking, you know, see you on the picket lines.
Get out and do some fucking organizing for us, please. Yeah, you know, that's the reality of it. But yeah, no, it's super interesting, just like all the different parallels that we're seeing sort of coming up from I guess like both sides. Yeah, if we're going to both sides this thing, like, you know, yeah, the Republicans and the Democrats, like it is simply just like, well, you know, there's a party that wants to kill people, and then there's a party that wants to kill people, but like a little less obviously. And the kind of the main observation that I've made from liberals who want people to vote for the Democrats is that like they're happy with a genocide happening over there, but as soon as they have to see it, all of a sudden it's a problem, right? And which is so absurd. And it's like, I'm not saying for a single second that there should be a genocide in the USA. Like, of course I'm not saying that, but it just shows their full arse, you know, for everyone to see, where they're like, oh, the genocide's fine, just not here. But also they're also not seeing the sort of birth of a kind of apartheid that's happening in the States either, because there is a kind of gender apartheid happening with reproductive rights and queer rights in the USA. And you know, well, you're not looking at that and seeing how actually like this is happening under Joe Biden's watch. And you know, like in terms of Trump, he got in power, he signed a bunch of executive orders and was like, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, and fuck what the Senate says. And it all just happened, right? And then Joe Biden gets in and does none of that. And in fact, like I've said this before, I've said it on the channel again, but I've said it on the channel before, but like, you know, I've got it, it bears repeating. He will do nothing for trans people, literally nothing for trans people, literally nothing for women, like anyone who can give birth, you know, reproductive rights or anything like that. And then as soon as the Senate voted against, or I can't, Senate or Congress, it's confusing, voted against an aid package to Israel, he used an executive order to sign that motherfucker straight through, right? $14 billion, fuck it, I'm using one of my executive orders finally. Like, if that doesn't just show you exactly why, you know, this sort of like veneer of like, oh, I'm doing everything I can, Jack, is bullshit, then I'm not going to waste my time trying to convince you, honestly. Like, I'm just not.
But what we're seeing right now is the sharpening of contradictions, right? Between the reality that we've been told is the reality versus the reality that is. And Biden makes it very clear when the liberals are pushing this game, peddling this game of when they go low, we go high. Sure, Trump pushes all this stuff through with these informal policies and these executive orders, but we would never stoop so low as to do that because we care about checks and balances. And then you see that Biden proceeds to trample over those so-called checks and balances to push forward aid to Israel. That contradiction is sharpened, right? And so, and it's my opinion that we're seeing the swelling of support for Palestine, although it's extraordinarily late in the game, but we're seeing that support because of the sharpening of contradictions that Palestine is bringing to the surface.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that if anything can be said about what is happening, I guess, in the imperial core right now, it's that people are finally like going, oh shit, I should have been talking about this years ago. Do you know what I mean? I think a lot of people are going like, yeah, I should have said something back when I knew in my heart of hearts, I knew what was going on was wrong, but that horrible prick at work told me that it was complicated and I need to shut up and I'm anti-Semitic, actually. I should have looked more into that.
I've seen a lot of people talking about that in regards to Jeremy Corbyn. Like a lot of people coming back and being like, oh shit, he was right, wasn't he? It's like, yeah. And look what they did to him.
And then there's also like, conversely, like just that subset of horrible, nasty, fucking centrist idiot Labour supporters in the UK who are just there being like, well, actually, this proves why Corbyn is, not someone to be stood behind, and Keith, the forensic, big boys back in politics is the way to go. So yeah, no, I think it's less. I think it's less people. I think that what's happening is that there were some people who were working class, and they were like, because you used to hear a lot, Jeremy Corbyn's a racist, right? Which kind of shows that there wasn't really an understanding of what anti-Semitism is supposed to be in those criticisms, because anti-Semitism is certainly racism, but it's anti-Semitism. It's anti-Jewish sentiment, right? And in the way that it was being used was obviously in the way that Israel is using it. So people might have just gone, anti-Semitism, don't know what that is. Fuck it, he's a racist. I'll vote for Boris. When Boris has said all these things about like women in hijabs looking like letterboxes and all that stuff, it's just this like absolutely absurd thing. So maybe some of those people are going like, yeah, definitely, but it's just a very like awful, like completely saddening reality that it has taken like the deaths of so many people, not even just in this recent situation, but over the years, for people to be like, actually, the people in charge don't give a fuck and they don't know what's going on, or they do know what's going on and they simply want to see it continue to happen. So yeah, it's a little difficult when he's the boy, he's still the boy. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn, he might have not been a complete revolutionary, but he was certainly on the way. Like certainly had a lot of stuff right. And there were still some people who were like, he wants to fund the police and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, no, that is bad. But look at all this other stuff, though. You know what I mean?
Sort of illustrates a little bit, if you sort of compound this, what happened there, and you compare it with what happened, for instance, with George Galloway. It seems as though the world is changing. One of my big arguments, separate from this main conversation about electoralism, is that Al-Aqsa flood changed the world. It brought certain contradictions to the surface, and for instance, that claim that hating on Israel makes you somehow anti-Semitic. That claim, that charge, is losing its strength, and we're definitely, I think, seeing that play out right now. Whereas George Galloway is a big Israel hater, and I think part of the electorate is realizing that, you can hate Israel and not hate Jewish people. In fact, look at all these non-Zionist Jews that completely oppose the genocide.
All right, well, so we're coming up towards the end of the stream, aren't we? So just a reminder, if you have any questions for us or Dan, get them in real quick, because we're about to start getting into those. Does anyone want to start reading out the one that we've already got in here?
We've just got one question, and it's from Peter Shastoshi. It says, feel like I'm not going to get an answer, which is fine because it's a hard question. But why did Soviet referendums result in the dissolution of the USSR, and what went wrong? It not massively like relevant to what we're discussing now, but I guess it's kind of voting, it's referendums.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a long-term thing of like the I guess like the liberalization of their government. There was people that were getting into power that were totally aligned with Western interests. There was there's all kinds of stuff. There was like it's a huge thing. I've got a book on it somewhere around here, and it's like this thick, So yeah. So there was a lot of stuff going on there. So yeah, a very big question to answer on a stream like this. Probably something that we could, if we found an expert, we could probably do a whole episode on it.
That would be really cool. Any like ex-Soviet nationals who are somehow watching our show, reach out to us. Let us know. If you need a translator, we'll try and accommodate you as best as we can. Have you got any thoughts on it, Dan?
I wish I could answer that question with any amount of confidence, but that is not my forte, and I don't want to pretend like I know things that I don't know.
I actually know the answer, but I'm refusing to answer it. So
That's how smart you are, Kira, and how much of an asset you are.
I'm so smart. I just don't want to impart my smart knowledge. So
Yeah.
just let it be known.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty
Quite bold. Extremely bold. Yeah, the only other question is that Dan's real hair? That's the only other.
It's okay. Yes, it's absolutely my real hair. Growing hair is something that I realized was one of the things that I'm actually good at, if at all, anything. So I just decided to let it go. It's been growing for maybe, I don't even know, a year now. I just let it go. I think I want a haircut.
That was kind of like me with a beard, because I'm obviously not good at growing hair. So yeah, I just kind of went ahead and let that happen.
I did the same, and there was a point at which I was like, you know what? This is not my vibe. And I got rid of it. And now I'm rocking the stash.
Hell yeah. Oh, the stash is good. Really
I started
good.
I started ironically, and then I realized, no, this is unironically fucking awesome.
I did that once, like about maybe like 13 years ago or something like that. And it was crazy because I was like, this is going to be silly. And I feel like I never received more attention from people than I did for that brief period. You know, it's just like, I feel like everyone loves a good stash, you know, like I had to pull it back, I had to bring the beard in. It was, you know, yeah, I think it's it's an underrated look. If you can pull it off, it's, you know, you can't really beat it.
It's also kind of like a rite of passage if you want to hang out with communists. You gotta, at some point as a man, you have to
grow a bit of facial hair.
yeah, at the very least facial hair, but like the stash seems to be a rite of passage.
Yeah.
Go through the young Stalin phase.
Don't even bring up young Stalin, man. Holy shit.
Bearded Marxist is actually a term as well. Like that's like a phrase for a particular kind of Marxist, which is kind of like
whoa,
kind of interesting. Yeah. It's I can't remember the exact thing of it, and there have been groups that have called themselves like, you know, we are the bearded Marxists or whatever like that. But it is it's a term for a specific subset of like Marxist authors, which I think is pretty funny.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
There's a guy in my dating app that's like talking to me right now, and he's like posing himself as, you know, kind of like a revolutionary guy. I haven't really inquired further, but he has no facial hair at all.
Oh, all right. So he's lying then.
Yeah, I don't know. And he's British.
Oh, no. Definitely not.
British and no
Definitely
facial
not.
hair. So that you
Yeah.
think that's a no. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
fuck that guy right off.
No, wow. Now I don't even know, but fuck him. Jesus. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. It's a good thing. Yeah. Unrelated. I'm still perpetually single, by the way. Maybe it's something to do with all these dating tips I get from my Red Planet team. Just like, no, throw that guy out. No facial hair and British.
What do you mean? I'm helping. This is good advice.
It's very helpful. Yeah, no, that's why I'm just waiting for the right guy. Thank you.
Correct.
It's revolutionary, actually, to discriminate heavily the
based on trivial features.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so we normally end our episodes with a little bit of homework for all of our listeners and viewers. I'm not sure who decided on the homework this week, but we got the note here.
Dan is
that's a
Dan's
producer's
100%
note.
the type that would be very comfortable assigning homework.
Oh yeah.
Okay, well,
Read.
it says
He's
here,
reveling in the opportunity to assign homework to a new crop of people.
Yeah. Our homework
Any liberal
line-
could like say a combination of words to me, and I'd be like, okay, here's what you need to read. I'm like so dialed into what people don't understand, because you know I recently have been learning about these things. So if anyone has any questions about anything, maybe I can point you in a direction. I can't remember what I assigned for homework.
You wrote read What Is to Be Done by Lenin, which is one that we've mentioned a couple times, but maybe you wanna go into it a little bit.
I was actually wrong about that, and in fact, I'm one of the few Marxists that tells you not to read Marx. Nay, you need to study Marx. You guys study Marx, study Lenin, study Engels. Sometimes you'll be reading something and you won't pick it up at first. Read it again, read it slowly, take notes, try to ask yourself, what are they trying to get at here? Participate in the reading process, actively read. Because we're I don't know how to put this. We're among the most propagandized people in the history of the world. We'll be more propagandized tomorrow than we were today. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And one of the most revolutionary things a revolutionary could do is to educate themselves. So don't just read Marx, study Marx. And I think yeah, what I just mentioned was what you just mentioned was a good one. What was it again? Oh yeah, what is to be done? What is to be done? It touched on some of the forms of struggle, economism, but more importantly, reframing our thoughts about how we can struggle. It's not
Yeah.
just the political struggle. It's not just electoralism. It's not just the struggle against the bosses trying to form unions and getting better workplace rights or better pay. It's not just the theoretical struggle. It's all of these things. We have to agitate, educate, and organize for a better future for the masses and the working and oppressed masses.
Yeah, absolutely. And Marx is very daunting, especially like Capital and stuff. But a friend of mine, I don't know where she got it from, but she said that she read it somewhere that reading Lenin is good before Marx because Lenin was obviously a gigantic fan of Marx, but a lot of his writing where he's talking about Marxism and Marx's writing reads like an excited friend explaining it to you, so you don't need to jump right into Capital, because it's extremely daunting. And I actually know very few people even within the realms of communism that have actually read all of Capital, because it's like immense. Most people, if they've read anything, it's just like volumes 1 and 2. But Lenin is really good because he contextualizes a lot of it outside of like the science of Marxism, whereas he's applying it to the material conditions at the time and saying we need to take this science of that Marx has kind of devised and apply the science of class struggle to reality and to actually kind of kick this off, and this is how we do so. And I think Lenin's great for that. Fanon is also really good for doing the same thing, explaining what Marx was talking about in relation to what was happening in France and Algeria and that kind of stuff. And it's like one of those things where there's so much of Lenin's writing is just like constantly being vindicated. Like it's and the same with Marx as well. Like people will always come up with these memes where they're like, but Marx failed to consider this, and then someone will dig up a quote and it's like, oh, there he is considering it. So just because they're old and they're relating to a historic time and set of material conditions doesn't mean that it's not still relevant these days. Obviously now there is a tradition of Marxists that have kind of followed up what Marx has said and kind of related it to our new material conditions, our new, the things that have changed in the world since then. But yeah, I don't think you can get much better than starting with Lenin. So yeah.
I think I would agree with that. I would chime in and say that the more you read Marxist content, so Marx, Engels, Stalin, Lenin, and other scholars and writers, the more you get used to the style of writing. That's really important. If you're not interested in jumping right in and reading Capital, I don't blame you. I don't think that's a great idea. And if you're looking for something that would be a good introduction to Capital, folks, I might say Value, Price, and Profit. That is something that'll drive home one of my favorite bits of it really drives home the labor theory of value, which goes to tell you, and he shows you his math. He spells out the way for you to reach the same conclusion, which is that during part of the day that you're working for the boss, you're getting paid. You're working and you're getting paid. And then there's another part of your day that you're working for the boss where you're working but not getting paid. However, if you don't do it, you can't live. So what do we call it when you're working for free, otherwise you die? It's a form of slavery. And I'm not using slavery as a metaphor. Wage slavery is a form of slavery. Capitalism is built on exploitation. It drives you fucking nuts if you think about that and you apply it to all of your loved ones. You realize that capitalism day after day are grinding the shit out of the people you love. And this is why shit's so fucked up.
I just want to add, because we do need to wrap it up. I just want to add that Dan on his YouTube channel does a lot of communist readings. So if you're looking for a very bassy, calming voice to guide you through some of this literature, I would highly recommend checking out iDanSimpson's YouTube channel. And that brings us to Dan. Where can we find you if people want to check out more of your content?
Sure, absolutely. I stream almost every day. Sometimes I take a day off on twitch.tv/iDanSimpson. You could see me sort of tweeting and yelling at people online on Twitter. That's usually where I like to do that. And my screen name there is Commie Knoxville. And you can also find me on YouTube at iDanSimpson. I have a couple audiobooks that I've read because I've learned that a lot of people struggle sitting down and reading a book. So I'm trying to make Marxist literature just that much more accessible to some more people. We got to get people theoretically to be understanders of Marxism and to grow out of any liberal tendencies that we may have been imbued with throughout our lives.
Cool, great.
So what time am I on? I stream almost each day from 9 a.m. Central Time to mid-afternoon. It changes every day.
Yeah, Dan's stream is great, so I recommend it. Yeah,
I love Dan's stream when I can catch it. It's great.
Thank you. It's been good seeing you in chat. I just want to shout out actually my community, because I think without my community, I would have sounded probably less than half as smart as I did today. So shout out to the Only Dan's community. Thank you very much for helping me wrap my head around this topic and how I wanted to talk about it.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for joining us. And it was a pleasure having you.
This was awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I don't get invited to a lot of things.
Oh, well, we'll make sure that we invite you back.
Yeah.
We'll get you back.
Great.
We'll get you back. Solidarity, love, and peace.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you all.
awesome.
This was wonderful. Thank you all so much. Have a good one.
You too,
Dan.
Dan. Bye. Well, what a good show, which is what we always do. We do a good one.
Always.
Like that. Yeah.
Never miss one. Not a single one.
We literally never miss.
Yeah.
It's the end of the show, so that means I want to know, Tim, where do I find you?
So we have a Patreon.
Oh, yeah, we
Yeah.
do that first. It's been a while.
You can find me there. You can find me over at you can find us all at www.patreon.com/red_planet, where you can help support us if you love the show, you love what we do and our guests you bring along. The best way to facilitate that is by joining Patreon to support us a little bit. We've got a bunch of different tiers for different brackets. So if you just want to get in just with like a small monthly donation, the first one is Sprite mode. That's about $2 American, thinking it's about £2. Is that right? £2?
Yeah.
Yeah, about that. And $3.50 New Zealand a month. And so that's how you get started with your support for Red Planet. By becoming a Sprite. The benefits include the sacred and forbidden knowledge that you are helping the Red Planet team, early access to VODs, access to the Red Planet Discord. So that's one thing we have. So there's different tiers here that all of them will give you access to the Discord, which is just, there's meme channels, there's game channels, theory channels, talking about protesting, organizing, all that kind of stuff. But if you go for the next tier up, Kira, do you want to give us a little rundown of the next tier?
Sure. It's Goblin mode for $10 a month and maybe £8.50, I would imagine, in England.
Yes, it is.
And then in New Zealand, something
It's
else.
$17.50.
$17.50 in New Zealand. Everyone loves a goblin. We all get a little goblin mode from time to time. Complete your gobology by going goblin mode with everything from Sprite mode, a pack of cool Red Planet stickers for you to stick in legal places and only in places like that, and access to exclusive Red Planet Discord hangouts. So the Sprite mode gets you into the Discord and the Goblin mode gets you into the Discord hangouts. But what if you want to go a little more feral, Mule?
Oh, whoa. It's coming up for you. It's beast mode. Ah, holy shit. It's £17 a month if you're in the UK, which is $20 in the US. And it's what in New Zealand dollars?
It is $34.50.
$34.50. You heard the man. Are you actually going to go beast mode? Well, then we can offer you, not just only, we can offer you all the stuff from the lower tiers and pin badges. Yeah, pin badges. Wear your excellent new pin badge, Red Planet pin badge, literally everywhere. It's completely cool and good to do so. But, oh God, what if you're just absolute, whoa, I love Red Planet. It's all over my journal. I've got little sketches of each of us in the pages of my diary. I can't stop talking about Red Planet to everyone that I know. Do we have a mode for that, Tim? Do we have a membership tier for people like that?
For the most sickest of all, we do have the sicko mode. So sicko mode is 100 US, probably about the same. Well, maybe 85, 86 pounds.
Spot on, 85.
85, yeah, cool. And 172 New Zealand dollars per month. And so, if you support us this much, we can only really reasonably offer you all the stuff from the lower tiers, plus a very special thank you message at the end of every stream. So with that being said, shout out to our sickos at the moment. They are JBP, Queen Pib, Cassitastrophe, and Risk Inverse. Thank you to all of them sickos for supporting the show. Your support means a lot and is what keeps us going.
Thank you very much.
With that all said, what if I want to hear some more from Mule? Where can I get a little bit of more DJ Mule in my diet?
Oh, Tim, I thought you'd never ask. Thanks for reaffirming our friendship.
More peanut butter in my peanut butter jelly sandwich.
I'm just peanut. You're butter.
No, that's right.
That's right.
Together we make peanut butter.
That's right, exactly. Because everyone knows if you mix peanuts and butter,
that's how you make peanut butter. Yeah. Try it at home and tweet us the result. You'll see.
Oh, don't fucking definitely don't do
that. Do it.
So where can you find me? I've got a link tree. It's linktree.ee/DJ Mule. That's DJ MUEL. Please go and support my latest video. It's out there on YouTube. It's called What Can We Do About AI? It went through various different titles and thumbnails before I stopped fucking with it and absolutely ruined the reach of it. So please go and interact with that. It would be cool to see some new comments on there. I've not seen any in a few weeks. But I basically talk about AI and what does it mean for us to have AI now, and what would it mean for us to have AI in a communist future, and what are the actual problems about it that no one's talking about. Here's a clue: it's that every kind of thing like AI and also intellectual property are also it's all just capitalism. It's capitalism all the way down. So go check that out. That'd be really helpful to me if you did that. I'm also on Patreon. You can support me there. I'm also on twitch.tv/DJ Mule 4 days a week. And I'm on Twitter. I got unbanned on Twitter and I got posting sickness almost immediately. So please go and give me dopamine on all my tweets. It's at DJ Mule _. Thank you very much. But Tim, I asked you first and you switched it up on me. So
I did. So you can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky as Dread Conquest, or you can find me on Twitch and YouTube as Conquest of Dread. I'm mainly active on Twitter these days. And if you're into weird future tabletop role-playing games, I've been working on one for a little while now. It's called Dark RPG. You can find it on Twitter, Dark RPG 2000. Check that out if you're into that kind of thing. What if my kind of thing is Kira? Where can I find more about her?
You can find all my stuff on my link tree. It's linktree.ee/KiraChats. I've been very much out of commission lately, trying to figure out my next steps. But I have not really been that active on social media, but I am reading the things that people are adding me with, like when they're reaching out and DMs and stuff. So if you want to reach out to me, that works. And also I've been reading the donations that so many of you are so kind to still donate to me. Some of these donations are extremely generous, and there's very kind messages attached to them. So if you would like to donate to me while I'm trying to figure out what the heck to do, you can do so on my PayPal. You can also still use my Stream Elements link, but I honestly you can just go straight to my PayPal and do that there. It's in my link tree. So thank you everyone for being so supportive. Those of you who have been supportive, I really appreciate it. And thank you in advance to anybody who is thinking about supporting me here on out, because it really does mean the world to me. So thank you.
You better give her money, otherwise I'll be fucking mad.
That's really peanut butter jelly time.
Exactly. Tim is right. Tim is right. Thank you so much, everybody, for the show.
Right.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week.
See you later, everyone. Bye. Goodness.